Good evening. I'm Jason Grow. I'm the chair of the Planning and Development Subcommittee. Welcome. Wednesday, September 4th, 2024. Today is a Planning and Development Subcommittee, but we have advertised it as a committee of the whole. So other councilors can participate and be involved in the meeting. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Council President Tony Gross very quickly to open up the Council of the Whole.
I will open the City Council meeting of the whole on September 4th, 2024. And now I will hand it back over to Planning and Development's chairperson.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm going to just let everybody know who's here. Starting at the far left, we have Jeff Worthley, Councilor at Large. We have Marjorie Grace, Ward 3 City Councilor. We have Frank, how do you pronounce your last name? Marjota, Councilor at Ward number 4. We have Danielle Argentino, our Assistant City Clerk. We have Sherry White, our soon-to-be gone Clerk of Committees. Tony Gross, our Council President. Val Gilman, at-large Councilor and Vice Chair of Planning and Development. And to my right is Dylan Benson, who is Ward 3 Councilor and a member of the committee. Did I say Ward 3? I'm sorry, Ward 2. I apologize. And we have Jane Remsen, who is the Vice Chair of the Planning Board. And then in the audience working with us is our City Solicitor, Suzanne Egan, to offer us sage legal advice. And our City Planner, Greg Cadamitore. I'm just going to quickly go through what we're going to go through tonight. We also have an audience of 2 and...
Who's online?
What's that?
Do you want to announce who's online?
Is there, oh, Paul Lundberg is online?
No.
Who's on? Staff's online? Thank you for that.
And the consultant.
Yes, we're going to get to that. We got Alex Kopelman, who is our director, our community development director, excuse me. Emily Innes from Innes Associates, who is a consultant. We'll be hearing from her a little bit later. And that is it for online. We have Paul Lundberg, who's watching in here, who's a former planning board chair and city councilor. So what we're going to do tonight, we've introduced everybody. We're going to, first thing I'm going to say is this is a public meeting. It is not a public forum or a public hearing. So this is for a presentation by Greg Cadamitore and any information we might need to get from the consultant and our city solicitor. And for questions from the city council, we will not be taking questions or commentary from audience members. That will be held, we will have a public hearing on September 11th, and again on September 26th. So September 11th, we will have a joint public hearing between the planning board and the city council. And then we have scheduled a continued public hearing for September 26th to finish up with the public hearing process. Tonight, we are going to have, Greg is going to review the process by which we got to where we are. He's going to outline the recommendations that were made by RKG to the planning board, and then from the planning board to the city council for their recommendation. We're then going to hear from Emily Innes from Innes Associates, who's our consultant on the zoning language itself, which is a big part of our role tonight, which is to go through the actual language of the ordinance. We will have any updates from legal perspective from Suzanne Egan. And pretty much throughout this whole thing, we're going to be asking questions. We're going to keep it to a dull roar, try to keep things focused and moving on the issues that are presented in front of us. We'll have ample opportunity to ask questions. I want everybody to walk out of this meeting feeling as if they had all their questions answered. So that is where we are. If we are successful at our mission here, we might end up having a motion to make and discuss that can then be referred to the full city council for the public hearing. That's the goal. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Greg Cadamitore, and if you could give us your speech or your presentation. You know what I mean.
Jason, you have another item on your agenda tonight. Are you?
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you for reminding me of that. Yes, thank you. We do have another item on the agenda that is to be continued. It's Special Council Permit 2024-003, Main Street number 20. That is going to be continued until September 18th, which is going to be 2 weeks from now, that is our next P&D meeting. Thanks for the reminder. All right.
Okay, it's already blinking red, which means I think it's probably going to die at some point. Greg Catamatore, Planning Director, and I'm just going to be a little redundant because I did prepare an outline for the evening. So on this first slide, again, this is the Planning and Development meeting for September 4th. On the bottom footer, there is listed RKG, Innes Associates, and City of Gloucester, represented by the Planning Board and our department. RKG will not be here this evening, but Emily Innes, who is the primary crafter of the language of the ordinance and amendments, will be here and will provide some of the second half of the presentation. So I will go over kind of what the MBTA Communities Act means for Gloucester, the requirements that we were working under, and the guidelines to get where we are today. I'll talk a little about that process to date, some of the meetings that were held, the outcomes, how we got to, again, where we are. And then Emily will walk through the actual proposed amendment, which is
Use this.
Like Christmas morning.
The old ones.
And we're back in business, which is referred to as the multifamily overlay district, which contains subject districts, the uses that are allowed in those districts, dimensional standards. She'll also touch on affordability or inclusionary and its applicability in the proposed districts. And then also some modifications to our site plan review standards and some additional amendments to create some consistency throughout the ordinance. And then we'll reiterate for the public the timeline and next steps, which were already mentioned, and then move into questions and discussion. And I'm going to try to take my glasses off and look at the screen rather than my monitor. So this has been on the city website for almost 2 years, better part of a year and a half. This is the action plan timeline that was developed when we first submitted our interim compliance plan. We are absolutely on target in phase 5 as we're considering the actual zoning amendments at this point, with the intention to go through the legislative process, come out the other end of it with some disposition on the ordinance, and then file a compliance application with now HLC, formerly DHCD. For anyone that wants information on what happened over the last 6 months, you can watch a play-by-play on the city website. Up in the upper left corner of the website, there's in the banner, it says 3A zoning info. All of the meetings of the planning board and the public fora that were held, that were recorded, are available. All the presentations, all the data and information that was developed along the way is all available on that one-stop page. So moving into what are the compliance requirements, I think this will be helpful just to ground people in what we were kind of up against. This was presented on multiple occasions. You probably also saw it some of you saw it in a presentation almost 2 years ago now. So this graphic probably looks fairly familiar to folks. Again, 3A impacts 177 communities, requiring them all to provide in their zoning ordinances the ability to build as-of-right multifamily, defined as 3 or more units or 2 or more structures with 1 or more units in them on a single lot. And each one of the communities also has very specific targets that they have to meet in terms of capacity of what they zone for, as well as they all have a minimum requirement of 15 acres per unit that they have to use as a baseline for density. The law also broke it out, categorized the different communities by the type of transit that they have within it. Gloucester is a commuter rail community, and we have a deadline of this December 31st to comply by submitting zoning that meets the guidelines that have been developed by HLC. So specifically for Gloucester, we have a minimum requirement of zoning 50 acres of land. Half of that minimum acreage needs to be within one of the station areas, and I'll point those out. We also, some of these things kind of played out in a way that maybe took away a lot of creativity and also limited some of the ideas that we developed along the way. There has to be one large district within one of those 2 station areas. At least 50% of the area that's zoned has to be in one large contiguous district. So that really kind of confounded a lot of ideas, and we'll show you what the result was. And then in terms of capacity, again, the 2,270 unit capacity, it's not new units, it's capacity. Every one of our zoning districts right now has a capacity. It has a certain amount of units in it and a certain amount of units that can be built, but it's the capacity. 50% of that capacity has to also be within one of the 2 station areas. It also can be split between the 2. And again, that minimum requirement of 15 units per acre. So one of the other things that every community was provided for by the state was basically a map and also a listing by lot of properties and attributes that were not allowed to be considered as a part of your 3A districts. And you can include them, but they won't count for anything other than increasing the denominator, which affects the density. So these are areas that were to be avoided, and I think they were to be avoided for good reason. A lot of these areas are watersheds, wetland areas. You can't zone your city property because if you decide to do nothing, it's not really an as-of-right scenario. You can't also zone institutional uses like hospitals, prisons, utilities, museums, private schools, and colleges. Because again, the intention of the law is to create an avenue for multifamily housing, and that would be kind of gaming the system. Even though there are ways to game the system, and some communities have done that as well. So I'm just going to focus in on kind of 3 metrics that I think are kind of important to help demonstrate how this could play out in Gloucester early on. Again, that minimum land area of 50 acres, that capacity number of 2,270 and 15 units per acre. So I have this graphic just to get people's minds around what 50 acres looks like and what 500 acres looks like. So this is the approximate half-mile radius around the Gloucester train station. The green circle in the middle is about 50 acres. It runs from the top of the Emerald Forest down to, I think, somewhere between Prospect and Pine, just to give you a sense of what that minimum acreage looks like. And within the half mile is about 500 acres. So this is a graphic that's been adapted from Opticos, which is a planning website, just showing a range of different housing types. And as you go along kind of the oblique x-axis, you go from a single family home to a mid-rise. You could, or Gloucester could have, if they chose to, we chose to, you choose to, zone 50 acres at a density of 45 units per acre. And that's just this kind of red box is to demonstrate what type of housing that would look like. Probably something more akin to the Halyard apartments, maybe a little bit denser. And that's a possibility. If you do the multiplication there, you'd end up with 2,250, pretty close, off by 20. And that would be the zone capacity, and that would satisfy the requirements. On the other hand, you could work on the opposite end of the spectrum and look at kind of a 3-family approach. again, try to meet that 15 units per acre, you'd have to zone about 150 acres for 3-family. And again, if you do the math, you'd work out to be about 2250 or almost that 2270 capacity. Or, whoops, jumped ahead. Oh, wait, no, I didn't. Surprise myself. So just to give a sense of what 15 units per acre looks like, I think that's something early on that sounded like a big scary number. This is between Exchange Street and Harold Avenue and Washington Street. It's a mix of 1, 2s, and 3s. It's an R5 district. There's 37 units there today, and the average density across that area is around 16.9. So above the requirements, but there's obviously a catch. There's always a catch. There's a lot of nonconformity as well. Anything that gets enacted, the only thing that counts are lots that comply with the zoning that you create. So just like I showed you that excluded land area, it goes into the denominator, but it doesn't count towards anything, so it dilutes the density. So does non-conforming lots. So I think there's a question.
Yeah, quickly.
So sure. So just like the exclusions, it increases the amount of area. Again, there's that minimum of 50 acres that has to be zoned. Obviously, it's going to probably be a lot more than that because there was not a high-rise approach. It counts towards the area requirement, but it gets calculated in the density requirement as well. So it's basically a blank. It's an area that has 0 unit capacity associated with it. So it dilutes the density for any district that's created with it.
What I need to hear again, if I may, was the part about non-conformity.
Yes. So likewise, almost to the same effect, you create a zoning district. It has dimensional requirements. It has lot sizes. Anything that doesn't comply with it counts towards the area, counts as nothing towards the capacity and dilutes the density.
Councilors, could ask you to both speak into your microphone while you're talking, not, can finish your question. And I think maybe write down your questions so that we'll get through this first. You can always go back to the slide.
I have some written questions. I just didn't understand it completely.
Okay.
Thank you.
So again, there was a lot of discussion in the beginning that there's a lot of flexibility. There is. You get to choose the where and the how much. Could have done a small district, high density. Could have done a couple of different districts, high density. So there's a lot of variation, or you can mix the densities as well. So here's a scenario. Again, the math works. 107 acres of 3-family at 15 units per acre gives you that capacity of about 1610. And then you have a separate sub-district that has a density of 40 units per acre at 16 and a half. That gives you the balance of what you need for that 2270. So surprisingly or not, this is kind of what the outcome ended up being like. We have a series of sub-districts that have different requirements, but they meet that minimum requirement of the capacity as well as the minimum requirement for the 15 units per acre, but they have different densities associated with them. So looking at just a couple of the other standards, just to really kind of emphasize, early on, trying to think of all the possibilities, a lot of them were eliminated fairly quickly just because of the way the modeling works. It's unfortunate. I don't think somebody came up with a very interesting tool, but in some ways it's not very flexible in terms of the application of all the ideas people might have. But again, you get to decide the where and the how dense, and then it's a sliding scale from there. So the other requirements that became pretty apparent in addressing some of the ideas were that, again, 50% has to be within the station area, 50% has to be one large contiguous district. So we always knew that that was going to be a scenario. And I think the biggest one is that the 50% of the capacity has to be within one of the 2 station areas. So I think there were some folks that maybe thought that there wasn't going to be a lot of impact in either one of the station areas. By design and by intent of the law, it was to locate around transit and within those half-mile radii around the train stations. So again, just to familiarize, or I think people have seen this, it's like the back of my eyeballs at this point. These are the 2 half-mile radii around the train station areas. So again, 50% of the unit capacity has to be within these areas, as well as the acreage. So that's just one thing to think about, regardless of how much area we zone, whether it's 50 acres, 100 acres, 200 acres, half of that was always going to have to be within one of these 2 station areas. So the more that you zone, the more of the impact you have to have within the station areas as well. So process and outcomes, just a listing of the meetings. Again, all these are available on the website. First public forum, otherwise known as the Lego meeting, did not go quite as planned. We did receive a lot of feedback, and it actually caused us to kind of pivot a little bit and decide that we really needed to have a broader Q&A session. I think the instructions were lost a little bit as well. I think we probably would have focused more on that exclusions map, because we certainly got some folks drawing lines, in areas and outside of areas, and maybe understanding a little bit more of those minimum requirements of what has to be within the station area. Maybe would have steered things a little bit, but I think it was still a very positive exercise. We got a lot of feedback, and again, we took that pivot and answered questions for 2.5 hours on May 21st. Where we went over the law, the guidelines, and the existing conditions, because there was a lot of question about what actually is on the ground. How does that play into this? Then we had a joint P&D planning board meeting to start kind of thinking a little bit more about what the approaches would be. Back in June, we had a second public forum that presented 3 different options that really ranged from, taking the intent of the law and really going pretty far with it, well beyond the capacity that needs to be zoned, well beyond really looking at potential for production. Also a real minimal approach that would minimize any potential change, and there are ways to do that as well. And then kind of a middle of the road that starts to look at a mix of opportunities, not trying to have a heavy impact in certain areas that are already dense, and also looking at some opportunities, strategic opportunities for potential affordable housing as well, which is, again, something that's missing from the law. Doesn't mean that you can't have inclusionary, and there's requirements around that, and trying to leverage this process to have a positive outcome for the community. Then we moved into really kind of took on a real focused subcommittee effort of the planning board. They met very intently over the month of July and into August, where the feedback from the public was kind of digested from that second forum, as well as input from P&D members to really kind of zero in on a final scenario in kind of mid-July. In late July, the planning board as a whole agreed to the final scenario, and then directed Innes Associates to start drafting the actual language. That's really just reflective of the modeling exercise that occurred, again, the where, the what, and then turning that into the words that would make it happen. And so just a little bit of what we kind of heard and kind of how things were addressed. We heard things like, look at options throughout the community. And again, the more you zone outside, the more you have to zone inside. You probably go above and beyond those minimum requirements. And I don't think that was anybody's intention to say, we're going to zone for a capacity of 4,000, 5,000 units, which certainly could be done. Including affordability, and that'll be addressed. There are a couple of sites that specifically are kind of geared using this zoning to actually leverage affordability on those sites. We heard no high-rise apartments. There is one district that I wouldn't call it high-rise. I would call it maybe mid-rise at best, akin to the Halyard, which will describe what that looks like. Locate districts near infrastructure. Again, that's the intent and the spirit of the law, and I think that's what you'll find is consistent and in every district that's been designed in this ordinance. What about the West Gloucester Station? Again, there wasn't a lot of focus until we heard a little bit more from the public on that. And there is a small district, and the reason for it being small is there's also a lot of those excluded areas in the half-mile radius around the West Gloucester Station. Don't put it all downtown. Again, there was a concerted effort to kind of look at the opportunities within the downtown area, not zone the entire thing. If we took an entire R5 approach, not only would run afoul of some of the guidelines, but again, we'd also have a capacity like 4,000 to 5,000 units. Take the minimal approach. I think that was something that we heard from planning board members and P&D members and maybe some other counselors. We weren't looking for a scenario to really try to have nothing happen. There are some communities that have zoned car dealerships where they know that there's probably not a lot going to change. Amazon warehouses, as long as their dividends are going, I don't think they're going anywhere. So again, there are approaches to really try to create an opportunity for nothing. I think this is measured, and we'll see how that plays out as well. Promote needed housing development. I think we got a mixed review from folks that are housing advocates in terms of how far this goes. But again, not every thing can be solved with this 3A approach, and there's other ways that the city can greatly benefit from other approaches in zoning to leverage housing needs and also affordable housing. And then a lot of preserving our open space. So the final zoning districts, I think this is kind of the putting it all together slide of the planning board. Considered all the input from the subcommittee and the P&D as we kind of really said, okay, this is the direction we're going to head. Again, I have to work with those model constraints. They are very tough. I mean, there are things that I thought sometimes we had some good solutions, and I would hear back from Allison Christensen, who you've probably seen at a few meetings. No, it's not going to work. So that is an unfortunate part of this. Again, good ideas sometimes just kind of fall off the table. We have met those minimum standards of the capacity and the density. We considered a sub-district to include the housing authority. We've had very good discussions with David Holden. I think he'll probably be speaking hopefully at the public hearing in support. We also considered ways of triggering the inclusionary ordinance. That's something we heard about again. That's something we have the opportunity to do. We refined the downtown and West Gloucester station areas around areas that we wanted to avoid in the downtown for a number of reasons. Floodplain areas, historic district, because that could also create some complexity for permitting for as of right multifamily. And then again, in those two districts, the cap is 3 family. And I won't stress that enough because there are folks that think, as much as I live in Beverly and I enjoy going downtown to Rantoul Street, and I think some of the architecture is lovely, people in Beverly, a lot of them hate it. They also think it looks like a canyon. There's a lot of activity, there's a lot of opportunity, and it used to be single story and not a lot of activity. So I think it's hard, a lot of change there. What we're talking about in most of these districts is 3 family. And I want to stress that and show an example of it, of what it would mean for these districts and what it would mean from a permitting perspective. So these, that doesn't look great. I hope it looks better online or when this is recorded. So these are the final districts, and we'll show cleaner versions of this later. On the left is the downtown station area. It's kind of centered just below that magenta kind of trapezoid pentagon, which is on Maplewood Ave. That's where the housing authority is. So the districts are in the kind of teal, yellow, kind of light pink, magenta, and then kind of up towards the upper right, there's a very light colored blue that's encompasses the Halyard Apartments as well as a property across Gloucester Crossing Road. So those are the sub-districts that were created in the downtown area, and then in West Gloucester, on the right is the West Gloucester train station area. The orange area that kind of flanks either side of Essex Avenue is a sub-district that was created in that area. And again, just stressing in the West Gloucester area, everything that's in green or dark purple or kind of the brownish color, those were all excluded areas that couldn't be considered. Some of the areas to the north on the either side of Little River are within riverfront area from a Concom jurisdiction perspective. There's floodplain, narrow lots. And again, at some point you have to define something that will actually comply. And when you have really kind of a mix of lot sizes, it becomes much more of a challenge. So some of these areas were looked at. They didn't end up, in any kind of modeled scenario because, again, Allison very quickly would say, it's not going to work. And this is just, before I kind of turn it over to Emily to walk through the ordinance, I think this was probably one of the best ways that we kind of demonstrated why the districts were chosen in different areas. So what this is it took everything that doesn't comply, everything that's not in the R5 zoning district, because we weren't going to be zoning in commercial districts, like the business district, like the general industrial district in the middle of downtown, the extensive business district. So all of those commercial and industrial districts are excluded. We also excluded the historic district. So everything in red is kind of not in play. And what you find, hopefully the Rorschach works, is what was chosen are the areas where there's the least amount of nonconformity, again, because nonconformity means zero capacity, dilutes the density. And so that's essentially why these districts were chosen where they were, particularly the yellow, the pink, and the kind of it's more like mint chip. And then the other two districts, the magenta and the now looks kind of white up near Halyard. Very different standards, very different approach, but the pink and the yellow and the mint chip are going to have all the same standard applied. So they kind of are considered as one sub-district. 3-family, I'll say it again, 3-family. These are all examples of 3-family in the downtown. Some of them would be able to take advantage of this if they had only 2 units in them. Some of them, if they were 2 units and were looking to convert, would still require special permitting because you have to meet all the requirements of the zoning district. If your structure is too tall, if your structure's in a side yard, if you can't comply with the parking requirements, you cannot use the multifamily overlay district permitting. I think I was probably going to say what I said on the other slide about the West Gloucester district. Again, just that same exercise of what's excluded, what's like not. You don't really have to go very far with that one with coloring things all red because of the amount of area that's either part of our watershed lands or again has other sensitive receptors, open space or wetland areas. Going to say it again, 3-family. I hope it sticks because it doesn't seem to be sticking. So this is an example of a structure on a street in downtown that has 2 units in it. And if someone were looking to convert to a 3-unit, they currently would have to comply with the parking requirements, which are 1 space per unit. How tall is this structure? Anybody want to guess? 38? Any other guesses?
Is it the average of the 4 corners? Or
So this is also a test because you clearly didn't watch the meeting from 2 weeks ago.
36?
It is 34.9 feet. So it would need a height exception from the zoning board because the structure is taller than 30 feet, the current requirement. It would need a zoning board special permit for a 3-family. And then after all that, it would require a building permit. The crux of most of the area that's in this zoning ordinance that has a cap on 3 units, 3-family, in this scenario would still have the same parking requirements, would require a building permit, and all of the review that's required associated with that. So this is what somebody does right now. They have to file with the Zoning Board of Appeals for a special permit, maybe a variance as well because of the location of the structure on the lot. Notice of butters, newspaper advertisement, public hearing. You guys are familiar with this. You do it every other Tuesday. Decision is rendered, filed with the city clerk, appeal period. Maybe they're appealed, maybe they're not. And then they go through the building permit review all over again. Submit your plans, get reviewed by the assessors, the engineering, the public works, planning department, health, conservation, and fire. All those other jurisdictions still have to look at the same things that they would regardless of the permitting process. In most of the districts, other than the 2 specialty districts that Emily will describe, it eliminates the zoning board process, but everything else is still intact. So the final scenario was based on focusing districts near transit and amenities. That was the spirit and intent of the law. The feedback that we received, again, there's a lot of adjustment from the first scenarios to even kind of early July. There were a lot of adjustments made. It's consistent with existing conditions and development patterns. Again, a 3-family downtown. Go drive around. There's lots of them. It generally allows what's already permitted under the zoning ordinance. Again, there's just that slight difference between the process. But again, if you meet the standards of the ordinance, you should be entitled to a special permit. That's what we do. We set up the rules. If you follow them, you should get a permit. And that's primarily in the downtown station area and the West Gloucester station area, which Emily will define very clearly. It does simplify the process. And again, these are not big lots. They're not big properties. They're not big buildings, small property owners. And we do have 2 specific examples in this ordinance of encouraging affordable housing in strategic locations, and that's partnering to some extent. I think it was a great idea. I think I came up with it. To talk to the housing authority because they're within the district and they have been thinking about ways of potentially adding some units to their development at Maplewood Ave, and then also leveraging a site at Schoolhouse Road that's kind of looked the same since 2009. So this is the actual map of the districts. Again, I talked about, and now we've kind of consolidated everything in the yellow on the left is one district. It's separated by roads, separated by space, but that will be treated in one way. The magenta area is the Maplewood Ave area, the Housing Authority site. The purple now up near the Halyard gets treated differently. And then West Gloucester also has its own standards. So from there, I will turn it over to Emily Innes, or I can ask either answer some questions
Before we go that
here
far,
before you go there.
We're going to take a break for a second from presentation, and I'm going to open this up to questions. I'm going to start with the Planning and Development Subcommittee first, but I am going to take one moment to do something I should have done at the beginning of this, which is to thank you, Greg, thank you, Suzanne, thank you, Jane, and the Planning Board for all the work that you put into this process to date. It's not always been white gloves and tea parties. There's definitely been some times when things have gotten a little rough with each other, but I do appreciate, I think everybody appreciates all the work that's been gone into it this far, your RKG, Eric Halverson, and Emily Innes and the consultants. So I just want to say that because I inevitably will forget it at the end. But it's been a lot of work, and now it's our job to finish this across the finish line.
You're welcome.
So, I'm sorry? You're welcome. Well, don't we haven't voted yet. So I'm going to open this up to Val or Dylan. Do you have any questions on the presentation to date or anything you've got going? Val?
Thank you. So this was, we're getting it completely now. So thank you. You've taken this to a new level of simplicity, and I think it's helpful for the public as well. I'd love to, if you could just briefly, maybe this is a question for Jane as the Planning Board Vice Chair, just to kind of very briefly just tell us a couple of the areas that we were considering and why the Planning Board, after further review, decided to push those away because it wasn't practicable.
Sure. So we heard back from, I think, the second public forum that people were very concerned that the downtown area was taking most of the brunt of this, particularly people in wards 2 and 3. And why weren't we looking at the West Gloucester train station? So we came up with a list of other places that the subcommittee reviewed. And one of those was the West Gloucester train station area, which ultimately ended up with the district. We looked at both of the Housing Authority properties, and Maplewood Ave ended up being on there. We also looked at parts of Railroad Ave, I think the parts that, correct me if I'm wrong, that weren't zoned commercial. We talked about that at length. It could be because there is, in fact, a Reimagining Railroad Ave plan that would, suggest that this would be a great place for multifamily housing. But we determined in our discussions with help from Alex Koppelman, actually, that the 3A was not the best zoning tool to use for creating multifamily in that district. And one of the reasons is that um, I guess ELOHC, who oversees the compliance, right, doesn't like to see optional mixed use. And I think we had heard from Gloucester residents that the commercial properties in that area are very important, like the Shaws and some other commercial properties there. So the planning board was more inclined to do a mandatory mixed use, which wasn't really a suitable solution for that district. Plus, if we use other zoning tools like 40R, which I know not everyone's familiar with, but they have some other benefits like state funding and some other advantages. So anyway, 3A just wasn't a good fit for that district. We also looked at the Shaw's Plaza on Eastern Ave as a mixed-use district. And again, we came up with the same problem, which is that the housing, state housing, living, HLC, doesn't look favorably in terms of compliance on optional mixed use, or sorry, on mandatory mixed use. They want to see optional mixed use because it's more favorable towards residential stuff, I guess. And it doesn't even have a plan behind it. There's no city plan that specifically says we need to do something in terms of housing in that area. So again, 3A just wasn't a good tool for that area. We also looked at the Lexington Ave area in Magnolia. There's no sewer out there, so that was a problem. And we thought we could zone for it anyway, and the sewer might follow. But another problem that cropped up when the numbers got crunched in the background as we started discussing this was that every time we added a zone that was basically outside of the two station areas, we increased the burden on the zone inside the station area because of that 50% issue. So again, just didn't seem like a great fit. We also talked about very briefly West Gloucester, further in West Gloucester, there's some larger lots, but it seemed really difficult to choose who would be the beneficiary of those large lots. And also it was very much outside local transportation options. So it didn't seem like it met the spirit of the law. So we crunched all of that during the subcommittee. And after that, the consultant who had been listening and helping us with that conversation the whole time went back and came back with the proposal that we have ultimately ended up with, which meets most of the criteria. All of the criteria is in compliance.
Thank you. That's all I have for question right now. Thanks.
Do you have anything?
I have a few questions.
Far away.
Thinking.
Microphone,
Oh,
Dylan.
yes. Okay. So one of my first you were talking about mandatory mixed use district. Was there nowhere in the community that could have worked for having a mandatory mixed use district?
I'll point out one real key component. Again,
Okay.
we didn't make the guidelines. If you have a mandatory mixed-use district with commercial and residential, you can't have any requirement for parking for the commercial component. Seems like a pretty big issue locally. So to be able to not have any requirement for parking for the commercial aspect, that was kind of a non-starter. So I think that's, again, something, not that there aren't areas that might be a good fit for a mixed-use district. I think we would just want to have more controls in place, and so that was kind of the decision.
And again, 3A just isn't the right tool. It's not that we can't do that at some point. It's just 3A is not the one to use.
There were issues about how that land was counted as well, wasn't it? It didn't count the same as.
Yes,
residential.
it also relates to the capacity. It doesn't have the same effect on the capacity numbers.
And you were alluding to in your presentation regarding the R5 and 15 units per acre. And a lot of folks feel like that's a lot. But on average, what is the acreage for a parcel on R5? So just to kind of give people an idea that sounds like a lot, but it may actually not be a whole lot. if that if that
I'm
question.
trying to understand. So,
Yeah.
so just in terms of a two-family on a 5,000 square foot lot is around 16.9 units per acre. A three-family is around 27. So again, it's already over the density mark. You probably could zone a much smaller area if you had compliant lots. And again, that's the issue as you start to, those non-compliant lots don't count towards capacity. They dilute the density in the eyes of the capacity analysis that has to be done. Even though you go down a street, a typical street, you're already over that density. I hope that helps.
Yeah, that helps. Like, really, my question is like, say the average parcel in R5, what is like the average acreage for that parcel? So say like you have a three-family lot, how much is like, it doesn't sit on more than, it doesn't sit nearly, it's not even nearly an acre that parcel sits on. That's kind of what I would.
5,000, that map that I showed that had the red and the beige are all 5,000 or greater.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay. And then another question that a constituent sent to me is, do existing multifamily units that meet the criteria count toward the total?
So here's a good question. So again, the capacity is as if nothing exists. So when you start to think about what will happen if you zone, people say, where are we going to put these 2,270 units? So if there are a grouping of, let's try to use round numbers, 100 lots that are all 5,000 square feet, that all have 3 units on them, those 300, they would count capacity-wise as 300 units. And if the 3 families are already there, the only thing that can happen is that could be taken down and replaced. So they don't count because the capacity number is purely theoretical. It's as if nothing exists. But when you think about the impact of enacting these ordinances, if a 3-family is sitting on a compliant lot, it starts to detract from the potential for something to happen. Again, unless somebody wants to raise the structure and all they would be able to do is put back 3 units. So it's a yes and a no.
So I know I had an idea, but I wanted to make sure that
Sure.
the constituent had that on the record from folks. So looking at like the presentation that was just up, like looking specifically at Millet Street, Trash Street, and it's just to look, what does the color, if you could explain what density denominator deductions, what does that mean for the lay person out there? What does that mean?
Sure. So that list of exclusions, that all those lands, if any of those are in any of the districts, again, they don't count towards the capacity, but they are included in the area. So in this whole scenario, I think there were probably about 2 acres of land in the area that were zoned that fell into some form of an exclusion, thereby they count towards nothing. So there's about 30 units of capacity that's not included because of those 2 acres. So again, that brings the total density down a little bit. And again, we are kind of right there. We're right just a little bit over 15 units per acre. And again, that's because we have a mix of areas that we've zoned for 15 units per acre, and then areas that we've zoned a little bit higher, including the Gloucester Crossing area and the Maplewood area.
So, yeah, okay. I just don't want to take up the mic too much, but I will. My other question. So can you elaborate more on like the idea of what you're talking about, collaboration with the housing authority around Maplewood, just so I understand, because I'm a little bit trying to understand that more, because I understand like federal laws that don't allow for further development of public housing in the country, and understanding, like looking back historically, there's been laws passed by Congress over the years to prevent further development of public housing. So if you could just explain that would be helpful.
So from a process perspective, if the housing authority were to add units or modify any of their developments, they'd probably use a comprehensive permit. So they would have to file with the zoning board. Kind of that similar front end. They'd have to do the butter notification, public hearings. Zoning board would issue a decision subject to appeal. So again, I think the housing authority is looking at options, and I don't think they're looking at necessarily high density options, but by including them in a district with the parameters that we've included. Again, that district only has a height ceiling of 35 feet. So if they do anything above that, they would have to find some avenue, either go for a height exception, but it enables them to have an as-of-right process with the city through site plan review by the planning board if they add units to that development. I think they hope to be able to. Again, I know that there's a lot of different, it's all enabling in terms of the funding source that created them, but I believe they are exploring some options and have some opportunity. We have certainly given them a pretty wide berth, but I don't think that's probably what they'll end up doing. But again, you know, that's just one way to create a process for them to kind of reimagine a little bit, maybe provide some opportunity, and it would just be, you know, a site plan review with the planning board.
And Greg, could I just add a thought to that? Hey everyone, it's Alex Koppelman online here. Just wanted to note that it is a trend across the region to where we're seeing public housing sites be redeveloped because it leverages publicly owned land where you have a lot of control over how it's used, how the financial equation works out. And usually you see a mixture of market rate and different levels of affordable housing that kind of cross-subsidize across the development. So you've seen a lot of this throughout the region. You see it in Boston, Somerville, but even smaller places like Gloucester, you're seeing this as a trend right now.
A few more, spread them
Okay.
out, let's go.
All right. So, and then
We haven't even talked about the ordinance yet. Jeez.
We'll get there.
we'll get there. So, just
You got 7 minutes.
all right. Just you're talking about a lot of folks, and since the last public forum, some residents have reached out to me and said that it still seems like most of this has been zoned in downtown. Could you kind of just elaborate to me and explain how it doesn't, it seems like it, but there is some burden sharing across the community?
I mean, again, I can't say other than you're right. I mean, that's what was going to happen from the get-go because of that requirement of 50% being within. And again, I think as Jane has pointed out, the more that we would do outside, the more that we would have to do inside. I think that's kind of important to, you know, it was kind of looking at the other station area was one aspect of it, to explore what can happen in the West Gloucester district, very limited within that half-mile area. So I think that's kind of some of the responses. It was also looking at areas within the downtown area that also removing some sensitive areas. But I think at the end of the day, because of the requirement for 50% to be within, as well as having at least 50% in one large district, it's just how the guidelines and the modeling works. It was going to have to be within one of these areas. So again, that's where I kind of point back to the Lego meeting. I think it was very broad. There were a lot of ideas. They haven't all been forgotten, as Jane alluded to. I mean, there are other ways and different opportunities. It's just not that 3A is going to be really the way to accommodate them.
Yeah.
Any more?
No, I'm good for now.
You're good for now. Okay, very quickly, Greg, we talked about conforming lots, conformity and all that. Can you remind people that, you alluded to it earlier, you said it earlier, that houses that exist now that are non-conforming in terms of being in the side setbacks and the rear setbacks are not subject to the by right?
Yes, you have to meet all the dimensional standards, and at some point, Emily will go through them. There is a table for each one of these districts. It has requirements. You can only pursue as a right multifamily in one of these sub-districts if you comply with all the regulations. If you don't, then you may need a variance, you may need otherwise, but it's also, if you don't meet all of it, then you have to follow the process that we have in place right now.
And I ask that to remind people that brings down the actual number of potential units that might be built by right.
It does. I mean, I mean,
We don't know how.
the modeling exercise has certain parameters that we're required to put in. It did not look at the buildings and their situation on the lot. So it's a little bit of a, again, meet the capacity number. There is some reality there, as you're pointing out. If somebody wants to convert from a 1 to a 3, a 2 to a 3, they may violate one of those setbacks. They may not be able to supply the parking. In those instances, they would have to go to the zoning board of appeals.
All right, we're going to open up the rest of the council. If you have any questions that you'd like to address to Greg, Frank?
Okay. How much how much communication has been going on with other communities about 3A? Has there been any brainstorming, or is just really just focused on Gloucester and not what the other towns are doing on their plan?
Do you think I dare try to do something that's not going to be unique to Gloucester? And I mean, it is. Every community has a different development pattern. They're all taking different approaches. Many of them are already done with this process. And there's a whole slew that will be taking this up again next year. But again, they've varied from taking 3-family approaches, similar to this scenario. But again, in some more urban communities that already have larger multifamily properties with high density on them, they've been able to do what's called paper compliance. They blanket a district over a site that already has 100 units on it, and that takes away from 100 units of the capacity that they have to think about. So there's been, I don't think any, and I've asked this, of RKG, who's worked with a number of communities. I won't say that this idea and this approach might work for some other communities, but we weren't really looking over our shoulders saying, what are they doing? Because again, based on feedback, based on what we have here, what our process has already been, communities that don't have any multifamily in them, much bigger challenge to try to figure out how to accomplish that. But this is something, that's been on the books for a long time. If you go far enough back, we had higher density multifamily districts, which is the prime reason why we have even higher density in the downtown area on even smaller lots. So it hasn't really been, I mean, there's been plenty of trainings of what the inputs are and how it works and how it doesn't work. But I think we just had to, focus in on what we have and work with it.
Okay. So once everything's sort of done, and what's the process once we submit everything to the state and they say this is not good, and then you have to sort of go back or anything?
So I think that's where we've been really fortunate to work with RKG. They have a really good success. We've also already had this kind of looked at from the AG's office perspective. There's one little language tweak that you'll probably see later on this evening, very minor. I think it means the same thing, but so I think we have the pieces in place to submit a compliant application. I think that's why the state front-ended this with the development of a model that you put in your inputs and you hit return and it spits back whether you comply or you don't comply. And believe me, there were plenty of times where, no, it doesn't work. So there's those minimum standards of the acreage, of the density, of the capacity. There are other things like smaller districts can't be less than 5 acres. And it's a blending of different densities. So all that is factored into the modeling. So if you've done your modeling correct and you've mirrored the language to be reflective of the scenario, then we should be in good shape.
Any legal questions or after this sort of part or this one?
Yeah, I think we can hang on to legal questions.
Then the state sort of implemented this 3A law. Did they consider any traffic studies or how would that impact like any of the communities, or were they really just focused on potentially building the 2,400 units?
3 paragraphs. That's the law. So it's pretty basic in its approach. Pages and pages of guidelines. You know, again, creating a path for multifamily, how you choose in terms of what multifamily means for your community, 3-family, up to high rise. That's how I think folks have dealt with some of those concerns. Again, we have a process in place for 3-family in most of the districts that we've created. Another district mirrors district across the street from it. That's already been considered for higher density housing. So again, I think what we've done is try to mirror our development pattern rather than necessarily introduce something that would really be of concern. I think if somebody, again, if I go back to the slide of the single family to the high rise and somebody said, we're going to put a density of 50 units per acre right in the middle of town, right along the Washington Street corridor, I think we'd have a lot of concerns. But I think we've done it in a very measured way that will provide some opportunity, but in a measured way.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Anything else? Marjorie?
Can you hear me now? First of all, thank you
Sure.
for all of your continued hard work. It does not go unnoticed nor unappreciated. I have a few questions. Some of them might have to wait till later. Explain to me, like I'm Joe Q Public, with the most basic intellectual understanding, why nothing in Ward 1 or Ward 4 was considered.
Again, I think when you look at lot configurations, the minimum requirement of a district to be at least 5 acres and have some kind of coherent approach to density and to having an actual yield that actually helps with the equation. Again, I think we looked at areas in Ward 4. We looked at areas in West Gloucester. We looked at areas in East Gloucester. And there wasn't a district that made a lot of sense that was actually going to result in probably something that would be less than 15 acres per unit, 15 units per acre. And the effect of that would be that you'd have to create more density somewhere else. So I think that's kind of the push and pull of when you factor in, you're going to have at least one large district that's half of the acreage that you zone. It's going to have to be within these station areas. When you start looking in some of those other areas, and again, they're kind of beyond the intent of trying to create convenience. I don't know if people that live downtown think it's convenient or not. I know there are traffic issues, but there is also a lot of convenience living in the downtown area. That's the spirit and intent. And so rather than trying to create districts that would just require us to zone more R5 in the downtown area, the approach was, you know, how can we kind of create a balance, eliminate some sensitive areas in the downtown area. And so that's basically how it played out.
Because one of the big things that pops up on the cesspool media, AKA social media, is the, 89% of it being downtown. So, I mean, just, devil's advocate, that it needs to be explained to the public.
Yeah.
Precisely and in the most basic terms, why, so that people can understand that and maybe stop,
Sure.
rabble rousing on social media.
So if I could just expand on that. So there's 163 acres that are zoned, 161 that are effective because of some of the exclusions. We could have, I suppose we could make it 85%, but we'd also have to increase the amount of R5 that's zoned. So it would be actually at the same time as you're starting to explore other areas, you're actually increasing the impact in the downtown area in terms of the capacity.
Another question kind of in keeping with that. How much is the actual percentage of the capacity in Ward 2 and Ward 3?
I haven't broken it down by ward.
Okay.
I mean, I'm just assuming if it's probably that similar number. We have a district in West Gloucester, I think pretty much. I'm not sure where the Ward 1 line is. Where's the Ward 1 line? It's in 1.
Halyard is in Ward 2.
Halyard is Ward 2, yeah.
So it's probably that similar split.
And I just want to make sure that I understand something that Alex said in regard to Maplewood Park or Willowwood, as it's called
Yep,
now.
Willowwood.
That when and if it is developed more, that it would include market rate houses, so it would kind of remove some of the stigma behind.
Not necessarily.
if
I think
possibly-
they can look at a bunch of different models. There certainly are, I think there's funding in the current housing bond bill that provides for introducing market rate to try to leverage more affordable housing, because at the end of the day, it's a huge cost to create affordable housing. We know that. So there's a whole bunch of different models. It could be, additional capital for the same type of income levels that they serve now. It could be a mix as well. But I don't know that I've heard
I
that
know
yet.
one of the criteria is that you can't set it aside for over 55, or you can't set it
Yes.
aside for here. So
Correct.
how does that comply if it's already considered public housing?
So the only thing that you can't do is you can't limit the size of the unit. Well, you technically you can, because you can define the dimensions, number of bedrooms, and it can't be age restricted. So affordability, I mean, if somebody wants to come into one of these districts and create an entirely affordable project, they can do that because they're electing to do that. We're not restricting them to do it, but they can elect to do it.
And this is just not a question for you, but just an aside for the general public, is that, 20-ish years ago, there were apartments built on the site of Willowwood. It was not always the townhouse type style you see now, so it's not really a stretch to put that back there.
I could tell you anecdotally, I think David Holden says it's a great model. They love the model that they have.
And I have, can I keep
Yeah,
going?
fine,
Okay,
that's-
thank you. And I know in other meetings, it was discussed 4,000 square feet for the R5 district.
Yep.
Is that still in play, or has it been rewritten? And is there a way to make it 5,000 and then make, if we increase it from 4 to 5 and then decrease West Gloucester from 6 to 5 to kind of change that capacity for downtown by adding it to West Gloucester?
I could tell you it wouldn't work. I can tell you right now it wouldn't. It is, and when Emily goes through the dimensions, that's what is in the ordinance right now. That starts to drop out a number of properties. Again, they become no longer a part of the equation. The capacity goes down. The amount of lots in West Gloucester that are included right now, it probably wouldn't change a whole lot in terms of what would be eligible for a 3-family. So it would not be able to be accommodated that way.
I mean, because just in keeping again with what, the scuttlebutt is floating around in the cyber world, is that, West Gloucester is getting special treatment because it's West Gloucester. So I think, to nip that would be prudent.
Also keep in mind that almost all those lots in there are zoned R20.
And I
Yeah,
understand
so,
that. I'm
yeah.
not saying that I don't understand it.
No,
I'm
no, I
saying
know.
that this is scuttlebutt that keeps escalating and escalating and escalating, and people grab hold of it and they don't let go of it.
Can I jump in and just say, in answer to your question, this whole thing, which I think the public may not completely appreciate, it's an insane math equation. So the struggles that we had on the compliance were every time we added something outside of the circle, the half-mile circle, the density, which was given to us by the state as a requirement, would go down. So we wouldn't have enough density. And that's why Greg was referring to the fact that we'd had to add some more dense areas in to make that number go back up. And so there were like 4 or 5 levers that we kept pulling at different times to make the math do what it needed to do. And it was like a Rubik's Cube.
That's too easy.
Okay.
See, but this is the component that the public doesn't understand.
Yeah.
It's like we get it because we've been living with it for a long time. So
Yeah.
I think, if there was some way to lack of a better phrase, and please forgive me because it's not very nice, but to dumb it down for people to
Yeah,
understand.
well, I'm not sure I
Excuse me.
can dumb it down anymore because it was
You
like
wanna
you
jump
put
in here?
these things into a
yeah,
black
jump
box.
Okay, hold on a second.
Excuse me. Is Emily going to be giving us the
Cheers.
dimensional?
I hope so.
So can we just defer all questions about dimensional until we get the next presentation?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Jeff, you want to ask your question?
I'd be happy to, but I wouldn't mind hearing Jane finish the last point she was making on that.
I was just saying it was, you know, you took the map, you took the acreage, you took the units, you took the whatever, and you put it into this black box, and sometimes it came out and sometimes it didn't. And it was literally the math. I don't know how to say it more succinctly or basically than that.
So firstly, I want to echo Councilor Grove's comments, thanking everybody, planning board, planning staff, community development. It's yeoman's work.
Thank the planning board. I'm paid.
Thank you, Jane, and your members. So, you know, as we go into the public hearing process, if somewhere in that period we hear something from any one of the 30,000 people that could come to these meetings that says, oh, we hadn't thought of that, would we have the capacity, A, to make an amendment, and B, find out if that were compliant almost in real time, like that magic formula that you have?
I don't think so. I think, you know, the number of things, the number of ideas that were looked at that did not go through the final analysis, there's not a lot of opportunity at this point. We are at a little bit over the target for capacity. And I think this, even though they tell you that it's 2270, they want to see that it really works. We are just over the density requirement. So as you start to consider properties that are larger, you would have to start considering higher density. So you'd have to start thinking about 6 families on, you know, a larger than 10,000 square foot lot. You basically would have to start looking at those districts. They don't allow you to consider division, which is really a challenge, division of land.
Okay.
So if there is a 10-acre piece of land, you have to plan it out. You have to say, okay, this is going to be 150 units, and you have to create a district around that and define it. And then you have to all say, okay, Rob Vicari, you might get a permit for 150 units because we just said they can do it as of right. So I think that's, again, having from the beginning, you know, there's things about our lot configurations that you can wrap your mind around. All the examples of R5 is something you can wrap your mind around. As you diverge from that and have large lots, you really have to almost do a planning exercise for that individual lot. Because again, you have to have that minimum requirement met. If you zone something that's 10 acres, you basically have to almost plan a subdivision for the developer and then have a site plan review process that hopefully addresses all the concerns. So by having, you know, the spectrum of 2,900 square foot lots in downtown and 10-acre properties, it's really a challenge to try to work with both of those things. And again, have to have one large district in one of the station areas. That's at least 50% of the land that's owned. So the more you start to consider these other things, it gets very complex. And that's why some of those things were ruled out.
I just think it's important for us all to be aware if we're trying to look at changes that might come from the public testimony, that it's so complicated that we probably shouldn't be pressing too hard on a lever on either side because of the impact. Do we have any capacity, if there's a proposed amendment to this amendment, to verify any of that information?
I would certainly, and Eric Halverson is not here this evening. He will be at the meeting on the 11th. If there are thoughts and ideas, there's probably very limited amount of flexibility. The districts are probably the hardest things to change at this point.
Could we pull the map up? I did have a question about the map, if that's okay.
Yeah,
Mr.
and
Chairman.
while he's pulling that up, I won't speak for Tony, but I imagine by the time we get to the public hearing, we're not going to be going through a whole line of what if we's. Because if what if we's are going to not render anything of substance, and anything that was substantially tenable would have to be then sent back to the planning board. Planning board would have to go back through that review, and we'd basically be starting the process over again and looking at the calendar and the clock that's not a place I think we want to be.
If it were a major change, we'd have to send it back to the planning.
We'd have to
board.
be, yeah, oh,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And also don't forget, that was the purpose of the planning board. So it was
Yeah.
our job to go through all of the scenarios that we could possibly think of and come up with the best one.
I wasn't
So-
suggesting that I have some
No, I
magic
know.
wand here.
But I
just want
just
to
mean-
set the expectation for the public hearing.
Right.
that If people come here, why don't you do this? It's not even something that we really have the capacity to even
Well,
process.
I mean, you can still make small changes to the ordinance, obviously, but I think what Greg is talking about is we can't have real-time recreation of
Yeah.
districts because that's quite a large exercise.
You want to get to the map
Thank you.
question?
Yes. I gotta get used to the glasses so I can do this. Okay. So the half-mile radius and the 2 train stations, but we're really looking at zoning within that circle. It's not the entire, like
It's
the,
just the colored areas.
right. So the district, the multi-family overlay district for Schoolhouse Road is partly in the downtown half-mile radius, but it's also its own separate district. Is that right?
Yes, so the radius is just to show you specifically the half mile. Again, the intent, the spirit, look at the 2 station areas. You can have some area outside that certainly goes beyond the half mile in that situation. But it's everything in that purple that will be treated one way. Everything in the pink will be treated another way. Everything in the yellow and the orange, again, are separate sub-districts.
So I think the proposal language is for the Schoolhouse Road is for 4-family by right, not 3-family by right. Mike, is that correct?
It actually doesn't have a per family type. It has a density maximum.
Okay.
So it's a little bit of a different approach. Again, that could have been my example earlier of you have the 10-acre property. You could say, okay, 15 units per acre. You could say that can be in 3-family, 4-family, 5-family, 6-family. You can dictate what type of multifamily, but you would do it more on an approach of density per unit with a larger site. So in that case, and Emily will get to it when we let her talk, that has a density maximum for the site.
Okay. If we were to go higher there, would that potentially reduce the need for as much density? Would that be a place we could leverage that?
I mean, it's pretty high density. It's at 40 units per acre. So it's 40 units per acre. So there's, again, these are smaller districts that the impact of that change is tens of units, not hundreds of units.
Is the MBTA property itself, and I can't see, is the MBTA property itself in this district?
It's not zoned, state land excluded.
I read recently that they are in the development business a little bit more than,
They have done that with some of their properties. Yep.
so it's excluded.
It's excluded from these districts, yes.
Okay. Is the Sonolite property, or whatever the street is, within the half mile of the train station, is that included in the district? Fernwood Lake Avenue?
It's not included in the district.
I know that there's some initial plan that they put before the planning board. I don't want to get into any favoritism or anything, perception like that, but I did wonder if that was an opportunity to,
There's been nothing submitted to the planning board or my office.
oh, I thought there was an initial,
Okay,
interesting.
let's stick to the question, that rapid fire, let's keep going.
Okay, couple more questions. Hang on. So there's a Gloucester Housing Authority property on Main Street, where they've indicated they want to develop. It's in the east end of Main Street / back of Prospect Square. I don't know if that's senior housing or just housing.
I believe the partnership with the Housing Authority and Harbor Light is for senior affordable.
Okay. Was there any consideration of potentially having 3-family by right there?
I don't think that would really help them. I don't think they're looking at a 3-family approach. And again, you have to have a district that's at least 5 acres. So you would have to encompass that site into a broader piece of at least 5 acres.
Plus, you can't have age-restricted
If they
housing
were to not have age
in the
restrictions.
zoning.
So same thing for Lincoln Park, Poplar Park.
Actually looked at Lincoln Park. I don't think they had any particular plans with that area specifically. We did look at a higher density district there. It was less than 5 acres.
Really?
Yep.
If we did a three-family by right scenario there, which is, they have obviously senior housing, could we say, okay, the units that exist would be senior housing, and then the 2 additional family units could be, all 3 of the units would have to be,
The only regulation on it is that we can't dictate that it be age restricted. What is built can be restricted under,
If someone elects to, they can.
so adding Lincoln Park doesn't make sense?
Too small of a district. I think, again, if you were going to try to do a higher density district, it was definitely one that was looked at. We looked at the housing authority sites in general. There are some things that I know that they've looked at Riverdale Place area. They might actually, there's some vulnerable sites there as well. Something that wasn't necessarily potentially ready for something like this. And again, we started to decide there may be other opportunities, there may be other ways to partner with the housing authority. This one really fits because of its location, because it can be included in a greater than 5 acre district. And they actually have been doing some thought around it specifically.
Might be harder than Rubik's Cube, I think.
Yep.
yeah,
As you
right.
mentioned. Okay.
One more? 2 more?
2 more here.
Okay. Let's,
Is the proposed change, right now in R5, what is the parking requirement?
1 space per unit
And so this would be the same.
would be the same as proposed.
Then in the West Gloucester district, I think I saw 1.5.
I believe it's 1. The current requirement is 1.5. It's 1 in the proposal.
Was it Schoolhouse Road that I saw the,
1.5, and that's
for the
consistent
larger
with,
ones.
that's consistent with the other overlay district.
I have a specific question on dimensions, but we're not
We're not there yet.
discussing that. Okay. And then one last question. If we were to do this and there was this didn't stimulate any development, didn't stimulate any new housing, and a future council says, we want to make it less restrictive and have more units allowed, would we have to get the okay from the state? And conversely, if there was a sudden 2,000 units built in 1 year, which I don't think is remotely possible, but if that were the case and we said, oh, we need to slow this down, does the council have the authority to make those kinds of changes? If, again, it'd probably be a future council, legislatively, would we have the authority to do that? Or are we giving up ceding complete control to the state on what happens in these districts?
So you got 3 scenarios there. First one, if you wanted to see an increase in development, I think we would probably have to file our proposed amendments with HLC to see if they still comply with the guidelines. I don't think you'd have an issue with increasing capacity so long as it also increased the density per unit and also maintained at least 50% of the area inside 2 stationaries and 50% of 1 contiguous district. As long as you met all those requirements, meeting the intent of the guidelines in the law, submitting them, I believe we could probably adopt those. If this goes sideways, there's a compliance consequence. You could repeal it. You have the local ability to do that, and there would be a consequence that's identified in the law and the subsequent guidelines.
And just elucidate on that for a second. So we could say, this is too much. If future council could say that, it would only be whatever consequences the Attorney General's office says, these grants are no longer eligible for Gloucester, but the city council would maintain the control in those districts if that were the case. If they make a decision about.
It's still a local adoption process, a local ability to change your zoning.
Okay.
And again, there would be a consequence, we'd be out of compliance. And I think the last scenario that you had in there was, the other thing you could do is if you want to stimulate development, you don't have to use 3A to do it. You could create any district inside this area additionally that allows uses. Doesn't mean that somebody can't still take advantage of what's being proposed, But you could have a district within this area as well that promotes higher density or some other form of development.
All right,
I'm good.
you
Thank
good?
Appreciate
Tony,
it.
you have one question.
Greg, you earlier said that there's, I'm sorry,
No, hey,
got
I got all night. I want Emily to be able to make her presentation
So,
so we can have more questions.
no limit on bedrooms, but actually, someone can build a 3-family, single bedroom unit, and that would be compliant, correct?
Yes.
And I think my question about the effect of excluded lots on 15 per acre in R5, that would be a question for Emily, assuming.
You can shoot. What's the question?
The effect, because of the excluded lots, what that had on, if we just maintained R5 in R5, and what that effect had on the 15 per acre.
Oh,
Reduced it.
we'd have to
correct?
go, it would definitely, it was
We went
probably
to
below
like-
14.
I think it was like 11 or something, guys.
I don't know if it was quite that low, but it drops precipitously. Yeah.
Yeah. You have in the 4,000 in the district, the R4 district, or whatever we're going to call it, the overlay district.
Yep. MFOD.
You reduced this rear setback by half from 20 to 10 feet. What was the thought process on
Thought
that?
we were going to leave those questions till
Oh,
we got to
is that-
the.
Is that dimensional? I mean.
I will say that
Correct.
the exercise was define the where and the what in terms of what type of
Okay.
housing.
how-
No, I can answer it simply, and then Emily can allude to it as well. The dimensions that are in here are reflective of the modeling. So you can imagine that might provide opportunity for potentially more parking, but maybe a narrower structure with being able to have more depth. So it's kind of a balance of looking at, you had to provide, the model has a certain allowance for a parking space, for the structure, for a unit itself. So whether, if you were to say, yeah, you can do a 3-family and our height limitation is 15 feet, the model will not allow it. It needs to have at least a certain amount of square foot per unit and be allowed within a height limitation. So it also provides for parking and the footprint.
And just, it was in the West Gloucester district, as Council Worthley alluded to, the proposal is reduced 1 parking space to 1.5. Today, in all R20s, which are 1.5, if someone came in with a request to permit, go before the ZBA to build a 3-family, you would still have the 1.5. So you would still have the fraction issue that was brought up at Planning Board, correct?
I mean, the building inspector, when he reviews those applications, you don't have half a spot, it's a spot. So that's what happens with 1.5, and in this scenario, it's just 3.
Right.
Yep.
So, but you would have that in every R20 district that.
Yes.
that created.
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry, you said in this scenario it would be 3, but if it's a 3-family, it would be 4.5, it'd be 5 spots.
That's
The
what he said.
proposal is 1 per unit.
Oh, 1, sorry, not the 1.
Yep.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you.
Scott, going to go to you?
Yeah, I have just a quick observation and question. Again, I want to join everyone in thanking everybody involved in this process. I think you've really taken a challenging, complex framework, and by summarizing the whole process that you've gone through and bringing us here, you helped very much to make it clearer and understandable in terms of how we've gone about trying to fit our square pegs in these round holes. And I think what you've come up with will not unduly impact any of our Gloucester neighborhoods, which is the end. It will help address the 3A MBTA public-oriented transit authority housing issue, while at the same time not unduly impacting our neighborhoods. Some of the questions that Councilor Worthley raised about change going forward, I think is just important to make note of here, because we're adopting a zoning law here, and we can tweak it and revise it at some point, 5, 10, whatever years in the future, apparently with MBTA and state review, while we're still meeting those guidelines. But I think that's an important, we're taking a constructive step to be in compliance and moving forward. And it's not cast in stone still. It's still subject to our experience what makes sense for Gloucester and
Let's
and
let's
whether we
get to a
want to change it.
question here.
Thank you.
Adrian, okay, good. You have a question?
That was it.
Oh, say,
There was a question here. I can't find it.
rise it at the.
Just end with, don't you think?
Think? Yeah, that's good. All right. So I think we will, Emily is probably left and.
Hopefully she's not, and we'll start hearing from the mighty Oz. Emily, are you there?
she's still
here.
All right,
She
there we
is.
go.
All right, you have 5 minutes to go.
I'll talk very, very quickly. Counselors, good evening. Thank you so much for having me. I apologize for not being there in person. I'm going to go over the framework of the zoning. Hopefully it will answer some of the questions. It might raise a few more, which I can answer now. I will be there at the public hearing in person as well. So looking forward to that. Greg is going to be my hands in terms of moving the slides. So Greg, I think we can move on to the next slide now. So we're going to start with the purpose. So the critical thing about the multifamily overlay district is you, the city of Gloucester, can tailor this to meet your needs as a city. There, as Greg has mentioned, there is a framework that you have to fit, but within that framework, you can tailor it. So the idea of the zoning is to take everything that was heard during the public process, all the work that Greg and the planning board and the RKG associates did, and turn it into the language that you, the city council, can consider and potentially pass. So we start with the purposes. I'm not going to read them all, but the idea was to tailor this purpose to the city. With that, Greg, please turn to the next slide. So then we take the zoning defines the overlay district. It locates it on a map. It identifies the fact that there are 4 sub-districts. It properly establishes it as an overlay district and establishes the relationship between the overlay district and the underlying zoning. The key thing to understand here is that if a property owner or an applicant wants to make a change under the zoning, because zoning is always an option, just because the zoning has changed doesn't mean that a property owner has to change something. It's only if they want to change something that the zoning comes into force. In this case, by adding an overlay district, you have 2 options. As a property owner, the property owner can choose to use the underlying zoning, and they could choose to use the overlay district. The key piece is that they can't pick and choose. So you can't say, you know, I like the use in the underlying zoning, but I'd rather have the dimensional standards of the overlay district. It doesn't work like that. So the establishment here says, look, there's now an overlay district, has a relationship to the underlying zoning. If you choose one, you have to stick to that. If you choose the multifamily overlay district, then you have to follow the requirements of this new section. Next slide, please. So this section, uses, just says what's allowed by right. Critical piece here to understand for members of the public who may be listening is that as of right does not mean that you can build whatever you want. It means that you can build according to the uses, the dimensional standards, and the development standards in this article. So the uses allowed by right, here's where we're going to start to call out the differences between the 2 types of districts. So the downtown station area and the West Gloucester station area are limited to single family, 2-family, or multifamily, but no more than 3 dwelling units. Maplewood Avenue area and the Schoolhouse Road area is a multifamily dwelling with 4 or more residential units, or assuming the possibility of more than 1 unit on the lot, it would have to be a minimum of 2 or more buildings on the same lot with more than 1 residential dwelling unit. The easiest way of saying that is 2 duplexes is the minimum amount that would fit that second criteria. So single, 2, or 3 in downtown station in West Gloucester, 4 or more in Maplewood Avenue and Schoolhouse Road. Next slide, please. This is just a pictorial representation of what we're saying here. So you can see the yellow, which is the downtown station area, 1, 2, or 3, West Gloucester, and the orange, 1, 2, or 3, Schoolhouse Road, Maplewood Ave, 4+. Next slide, please. So we've been talking a lot about dimensions in our conversation today. So this is the dimensional table. Again, I'm going to call out the specific differences that you're going to see here. One of the interesting things about the downtown station, the West Gloucester station, I think Greg alluded to it when he was talking about nonconformities. When you look at New England communities, many of them were built out, especially in downtown areas, well before zoning came into play. Zoning didn't actually come in until somewhere in the 20s for some of the earliest in New England, up until about the 50s for some communities. They didn't have zoning until the 50s. So what you see on the ground does not actually match the zoning. It tends to be more dense. So the conversation that I heard in listening to what had happened during the public process, the conversations that Greg and I had, that RKG Associates and I had, is really downtown station West Gloucester is a little bit of an opportunity for right sizing. It doesn't capture all of the non-conforming parcels. It doesn't go down that low in terms of lot area, but it does kind of right size it to what it is now in many cases, especially in the downtown. Next slide, please. So contrast that with Maplewood Avenue and Schoolhouse Road. These are a cluster of larger lots. So the lot area can be a larger size. They're going to have a higher density. They're also a smaller area. And we've alluded throughout the conversation tonight about the math of this. The smaller lot areas gets us that little bit higher density versus in terms of dwelling units per acre. With Maplewood Ave and Schoolhouse Road, with that lot area size, you have to go up a lot more. And if we go, in order to get the same level of density, if we go to the next slide, I'm just going to call out a couple of other pieces. So lot area, building height is another way of controlling density. And in this case, the downtown station, West Gloucester Station, Maplewood Ave are all at 35. All very consistent with what's there now. Actually, I think some of the examples Greg showed earlier of images of buildings that currently exist is that they're actually higher than the building height. So they would still be non-conforming in that respect. Next slide, please. A key difference here is that Schoolhouse Road is 55-foot limit, and that's to match the existing buildings in the area. So very much context driven in terms of what the building height is. Next slide, please. So the other big difference between the station areas and the Maplewood Schoolhouse Road are the final way of controlling density. Downtown station area where West Gloucester Station, as we've talked about, there is a maximum of 3 dwelling units per lot. So somebody cannot come under this zoning and build more than 3 units per lot. Next slide. With Maplewood Ave and Schoolhouse Road, they have a dwelling units per acre maximum, and that is reflective of the level of density that's allowed there, the assumed mix of buildings and units that would be there versus the no more than 3 family in the downtown station, the West Gloucester Station. Next slide. So a couple of other limitations. We've talked a little bit about the parking already, so I won't spend too much time on it, but 3 downtown, West Gloucester, Maplewood, those 3 sub-districts are all 1 space per dwelling unit. Schoolhouse Road, a little bit higher at 1.5 spaces per dwelling unit. The planning board does have a little bit of flexibility in terms of how the existing design and layout standards would work, simply because of the existing smaller lot sizes, especially in the downtown station area. So that provides the planning board some options to deal with the smaller lot sizes. And these are similar to your existing zoning districts already. Next slide, please. So we talked a little bit about affordable housing, and when this draft was written, we had not yet gotten the economic feasibility analysis from RKG Associates. They were still working on it based on the final decisions from the planning board. So we had 2 options in here. One that says if Gloucester can get to that higher level of affordability, if the EFA supports that, then your existing section 5.11 will apply to Maplewood Ave and the Schoolhouse Road area. It doesn't apply to the downtown or the West Gloucester Station area because the limits are 3 units, and your section 5.11 kicks in, I believe, at 6 units. If the EFA shows that that higher level of affordability is not achievable, then we have to go back to what is in the compliance guidelines, which is 10% of units, 80% of area median income, and rounding down. Next slide, please. The good news is that the EFA came in and your section 511 can apply based on what the EFA found in terms of your ability to support that higher level of affordability. So we can make a tweak there in that language. Next slide, please. We could also, I should just say, we might also consider wanting to leave that language in place just in case for some reason HLC challenges the EFA. You don't have to come back to change it. It wouldn't hurt to leave it in place, but you could also consider taking it out. Finally, this would undergo site plan review, not for the up to 3 units, but it would undergo site plan review for Maplewood and Schoolhouse. So there are standards for that review in terms of both site and buildings, and you just see the categories there. This is consistent with the ability to conduct site plan review. You have similar standards in other parts of your zoning ordinance already. Next slide, please. And there's some additional changes. Whenever you add a new district, you need to put that district into the rest of the zoning ordinance. So the right pieces point to the right places, and that's what you see here. The other is you have an existing section 5.30, and we're actually replacing that. It hasn't been used as my understanding. Oh, sorry, it had the 3-year sunset date from the date of adoption in 2017. So it actually expired in 2020. So rather than creating a whole new section, we're just replacing that section with this section, again, assuming City Council votes to support it. Next slide. Okay, I think Greg, it's back to you.
Wow, I think
kidding,
that was 7 minutes.
Yeah, I know. So
So
that rapid fire response, I guess the question I want to ask right now is, are there any immediate questions that come to mind based on what she said, or shall we look at this a little more slowly, because we have to make a recommendation on this as a general
sure.
amendment.
Yep.
Amendment to the zoning ordinance. I think we were going to turn to Suzanne first real quick and ask if there's any, in addition to the AG's tweak on the language about the site review and the EFA, what are there any other legal consequences or changes that we need to be aware of before we go into the zoning nitty gritty? Okay, all right. Did you want to add anything real quick?
I'll wait for your questions. But again, there are a couple of things that we've learned since, let me clear one thing up. Since, was it August 9th?
That was a long.
Well, it was actually August 9th. That's when I wrote the memo. I did mention in the transmittal of the planning board's recommended zoning to the city council, I mentioned in the first line that at a duly noticed public hearing held on August 8th, it was not a public hearing. I apologize for that. It was just a public meeting. But since August 9th, we've again had some pieces fall into place. Emily just mentioned one being the completion of the economic feasibility analysis around our inclusionary. So that, again, we probably don't have to change anything right now, but that's a very good positive finding that we can apply our inclusionary as we do right now. The state provided a certain amount of limitation that was less than we require, unless you can prove that it's not creating an economic impact on the type of housing that you promote in your ordinance. Additionally, there was a pre-review of the ordinance by the AG's office, and there's a minor tweak. Again, no consequence, but a minor tweak that was provided to us. And there was one other item that I can get to after, when we get to that section, if you want to walk through it.
So what I think in the intro, go ahead, Tony. Yeah, well, I was going to suggest that we start going back to the beginning and go rapidly through each. They're not in there. All right, Tony, go ahead. We'll, you have a question for Emily.
On the affordability, maybe this is for Suzanne too. If we do not adopt what the Attorney General has told us we can adopt, the 10%, does that leave us, does that expose us?
So the Attorney General didn't have any comment on the affordability.
Oh, okay.
That
So-
was,
so-
that was just in the guidelines. If you have an existing inclusionary ordinance or you're considering an inclusionary ordinance, you're limited unless you can demonstrate, and they provide you with the tool to make that
So it was
demonstration.
the economic,
Economic feasibility analysis.
right, and that went through the Economic Office of
Housing.
Living.
So that will be a part of our compliance application. We will present them with
Right, well,
an
my
application
question-
and
My
that.
question is, we've been given the green light to include our inclusionary housing. Are we leaving ourselves exposed at the 10% if we adopt it at the 10% instead of our 15%?
No, I don't think we are. We have, by default, if so I want to be clear, HLC hasn't said your economic feasibility analysis is approved. RKG has used the tool that they've provided to model the impact of the inclusionary, which has come out again. They give you the tools, you apply the tools, you get an answer. And the answer is we can apply our ordinance as it stands to those two districts.
And there is no exposure.
It doesn't expose us to our ordinance in general, 511. It's just in this package when it gets submitted, if for some reason they analyze the EFA and they determine that, hey, you entered this and you should have entered that, and it actually does have an impact, we have the language in place that otherwise we would be reduced to 10%.
Will this not be adopted until till they approve it?
We will adopt an ordinance and submit an adopted ordinance to the state as part of the entire compliance package.
And I'll get back to that.
Okay, Val or Dylan, do you have any general questions? I want to leave the specifics because we're gonna hit the, sorry? No, to the general presentation.
Did you want to
I don't want to get into individual items in each of these areas because we're going to go through them again. So if you have general questions for Emily or Suzanne, I think that now's the time to go.
Yeah, just a general, you want
Go ahead, Val.
Okay. Yeah, just a general question, because you talked about like it going through and being reviewed. If there was, they said that this didn't work, would it have to come back to us for does that make sense?
So far, of the 77 communities that have adopted zoning, they've all submitted their packages. There have been some determinations of you comply. I don't know what it will look like if they find something that's off. I'm assuming, well, you can never assume, but I would think we've done the job. We think that we've applied. If there's something that doesn't quite fit, we'll probably get, a response from them that your ordinance needs to do this and probably a timeline to rectify that.
Okay.
Greg, actually, if I can jump in on that.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I've gone through it recently. HLC had a question, not on zoning that I had written, but on another piece of the zoning bylaw in this case. And they asked for a meeting. And they've given us time to respond and, explain how it does or does not comply. So you have a chance to talk back and forth before you would have to go back to city council for any reason and just say, hey, did you see this? Or we thought that. So there's that opportunity for a back and forth.
Well, thank you, Emily. That answered my question. And thank you.
Hey, Val?
Yes, thank you. So conveniently, we're looking at the slide that I have a question for Suzanne, and that's the purpose slide. And my question is, in general, are those the standardized 4 elements that we have to comply with verbatim, or do we have any flexibility of modifying any one of those 4 purpose statements?
I mean, again, Emily can speak to this. I think these are kind of general statements. There's no requirement. The state has provided a model. We also kind of looked at some of the model, and it didn't seem like it really fit. But this language does not change, the intent, the actual impact of the ordinance, of what it allows, where it allows, and how it otherwise complies. I mean, these are intentions. So I think there's some flexibility if you really want to wordsmith.
That's my only question. into the detail. Thank
Right.
you.
So anybody else with like a 10,000-foot question? Jeff?
If this is not 10,000 feet, just correct me. In section 533.2, I think this is new language, and we went through that presentation, Emily, very quickly. I appreciate it, and I'm impressed how well you know it. But the accessory uses that are allowed by right, garage.
I think we're going
gonna-
through
we're-
this number by number.
Yeah, we're going to go through each paragraph. So hold that thought.
Okay.
I'm really more interested in generalized questions about what Emily has already presented. Is there anything else concerned about? You want to try again?
Well, I think you'll see it as a bigger 10,000 foot question.
Let's stick with
We're gonna
the-
get there,
We're going to
though.
get
Let's
there.
start
You're going to
with-
have the opportunity to ask that question.
We're at 5.30.1.
Yeah, so I think we're just gonna go through each section as rapidly as we can, but as thoroughly as we can if we need to. So on the 530.1 purpose, does anybody have any issues, any questions that they would like to raise? Okay. On 530.2 overlay district, is there anything do we need to read this language? I mean, it's posted, you got it here on the thing, so. Are there any questions specifically to 530.2.1 or 530.2.2 establishment? Anybody else? No, good, all right. See, this is going to be super easy. 530.2.3 applicability, anything there? Do we have the entire thing on here? Because I don't think we do.
I can pull it up if we want to
We must
pull the actual document.
Let's go through it. No questions on five. This is pretty much the basic boilerplate stuff. 530.2.4 standard to be applied, except as otherwise set forth in section 5.30, the planning board shall be the site plan review authority and grant site plan approval, et cetera, and so on. Any questions in here? And I have one, which I will toss out to you. What's that? Are we back to it? Okay, it's 530.2. I was hoping we were sharing the actual zoning language.
It's in the packet.
He's got it. What's that? You want to share the packet? Is that easier for you?
No?
No, we're on the paragraph by paragraph.
Oh.
Yeah.
I have it up. Share mine.
Oh, Sherry wins.
I have it on
Yeah, let's go with that. This is going to give you the opportunity, Greg, to explain site plan approval and get that little definition out of the way. 530.2.4, standard to be applied.
So again, Emily had mentioned that this is something that has been enabled in the guidelines. As of right, permitting doesn't exclude the ability to have site plan review and standards. The planning board does this for a variety of different types of projects currently. They are the site plan and review authority for the city, so it made good sense to have them continue to do so. So for the two specific sub-districts, the Maplewood Ave and the Schoolhouse Road, an applicant would be required to meet the standards that are identified in the ordinance, as well as all the other standards that are already in the site plan review ordinance, and make a filing with the planning board before they would be able to pursue a building permit application.
And this is not the same as a special permit process or,
It is not. So it is a process where the planning board has influence on the process. They have guidelines and standards that need to be met. The planning board has the ability to hold them to those standards, has the ability to waive some of those standards. But they do have a framework that they have to work from. If they don't comply with a standard, that's grounds for a potential denial. But it is more of a dialogue than it is a special permit.
and can you explain when site plan review would come into play?
So for a project proposed or a multifamily project proposed in either one of those two sub-districts, They would first have to make a filing with the planning board, obtain that approval before they could move into the other half of the construction permit review with the city.
It wouldn't apply to three-family construction in.
Would not apply to three-family. There are standards, again, that would be reviewed. If a three-family application comes in either the West Gloucester or the downtown station area, they would make a filing just like they would now, post zoning board activity if needed, with the building department. Building department then still reviews it for zoning compliance, gets reviewed by the assessors, the engineers, our office, conservation, fire, all the departments that otherwise would review any building permit.
Any other questions on site plan review? Anybody? No? All right. In that case, let's go to 530.3 uses. Any questions on 530.3.1 uses allowed by right? That was reviewed by Emily. Any questions? Okay, good. See, this is perfect. 530.3.2 accessory uses. Following uses considered accessory as of right to any permitted uses in section 530.3.1. Any questions there? Yeah.
So this is new language, right? So if someone builds or proposes to build a three-family by right with a detached garage, could they then the next day come in for an accessory dwelling unit, which is allowed by right as well, to create a fourth unit without, and still be allowed in?
Nope.
Okay, what prevents that?
Accessory dwellings are only eligible for single-family homes. A two-family cannot have an accessory dwelling unit. A three-family cannot have an accessory dwelling unit. It's only for single-family. That's defined in the accessory dwelling unit ordinance.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. Any other questions on this one? No? Tony? No? All right, prohibited uses. That's pretty straightforward. Any use not specifically allowed by right within the MFOD is provided in sections 530.3.1 and 3.2 is prohibited, and Val's got her hand up, so what do you got?
Thank you. I have a question on, can you roll that up a little bit? Thank you. On the.
So soft-spoken.
Yeah, right. The rear yard minimum.
We're not there yet.
Foot. I thought you said other questions on the dimensional table.
No, we're on prohibited uses. Now we're going to get to dimensional requirements.
Okay. I'll wait.
Okay. I suppose I should have cut you off a little soon, but go ahead with you. I thought you had questions on the other one. So the dimensional requirements.
So my dimensional requirement
Sorry
question
about that.
is the rear yard minimum required footage for the of 10. And my question is, why is that not 20 as it currently is? So I guess if you look back here, one of the parameters says that they need to be consistent with what they already are. I'd have to find that, but, so I'm just questioning why.
Are you going back to the purpose?
No.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm trying to.
Dimensional table, I'm on rear yard.
Yep.
Rear yard
setback.
setback.
Yeah, and I think I addressed this earlier, that question was raised. So these dimensions are reflective of the modeling. So there is a certain amount of square footage for each unit. You have to think about that in terms of kind of like a layer cake. If you're allowing for a four-family, you have to have a certain amount of square footage that accommodates 1,000 square feet per unit, the number of parking spaces that are required, and then you have to look at the dimensional standards for that district. If all of those things are put in and it violates it and says you actually can't do it, then something has to be adjusted. So I think that one in particular was adjusted because you might have to have a narrower structure that's a little bit longer to accommodate the requirements for the square footage per unit. And I can have Eric verify that at the next meeting.
Okay, I was just
Yep.
kind of trying to visualize why that would
Yep.
happen in someone's backyard. And it
Yep.
just seemed, it just didn't make a lot of sense.
Yep.
So you're just saying it's part of the modeling that was done?
So basically, again,
Like,
any,
You want to take more space out of their backyard to create.
I don't want to take
lot
any
more
space out of somebody's backyard. It's just more
For the
flexibility for the
Flexibility.
structure.
Okay.
So that's a minimum. They can put more.
It could be stairwell that needs to go on the back of a building, for instance, that might currently if somebody even was converting a 2 to a 3 by putting in an attic apartment and they have to put in a second mean of egress, and sometimes on the back of the structure, they might have to create a second access, and that goes into the setback, that's the type of thing that could potentially be accommodated by that additional space off the rear.
Okay, thank you.
Tony?
Greg, you said 4-family. I just want to,
I was just using that,
Yeah,
yeah.
this
I
is-
stick to 3-family.
this is 3-family.
yes.
And yeah, when you answered it for me, it was pretty
Yep,
clear that
yep.
particularly you needed more space for parking and things like that.
Yep.
So the building went back a little
Yep.
bit further for this.
On this side of the table, any questions on dimensions? Actually, go ahead. I've got one as well, but go ahead,
Thanks.
Jeff.
I'll be quick. If I own a 2-family in the downtown station and it's currently 36 feet, and I want to take advantage of this and put a 3-family in by right, but I'm at 36 feet, I'm not going any higher. Do I need to get a permit from the
Yes.
zoning?
Change of use, and they will look at the compliance of the structure to the ordinance, and you actually wouldn't be able to use this.
Wouldn't be able to use this, you're saying?
Correct.
So I need a special.
You would need a special permit to
Right.
alter an existing non-conforming structure and a
And
special.
a city council
for
permit,
family.
right?
and a city
36
ca-
feet would be a city
Yeah.
council special
You
permit.
would. You want to make this easier?
Yeah, I was going to say. And I just want to ask this question. Emily, you said that the 55 feet in the Schoolhouse Road for the height was in keeping with buildings that are that size. Now, the biggest building, I mean, there's obviously there's wind turbines not too far from there. There's industrial buildings across the way, but in that area, I think Halyard is the tallest building in the area. Is that the standard that we're using for 55, or is
Yes.
there some other measure?
That's borrowed from the existing overlay district.
And if we went down on height, would that change the dwelling units per square foot formula?
You know, we could look at that. I think that's one where, the easiest thing was to say, look, here's a site that was already permitted at a certain height and density for a project that didn't go forward. And actually, I think that project was taller than this requirement. So it's parity across that area. But we can ask Eric the tolerance for that.
Just to see how it affects it. And then my last question is, if it's not too much work, could we have a slide between now and the time we vote on this that says, here's the proposed change and here's what it was? So lot area was 5,000 and we're proposing 4,000,
You would just want a red line?
something, just
use
to see a
table?
comparison that's
We
easy
can do that. It's
without having to go back and forth between our memories of the.
You just want to
code,
see the underlying standards.
what it is and what
Okay.
we propose
Yeah,
changing.
it's-
If it's not a lot of work, if
No.
it's hours
No.
and hours and hours,
Nope.
and I don't.
Nope.
I'll
But
do
just
the
to
work.
clarify, it's not changing.
Right.
So
the underlying.
the
zone.
Well,
underlying
there-
zoning sticks, and this is a new overlay district.
Yeah. But I understand he's making the point
Too,
of
but
what's
I just
different.
don't want anyone to think it's
Sorry.
changing. It's not changing.
Compared to what, without this overlay district, what is underneath that?
Right. Also, so I've got, Marjorie, you have any questions? Anybody, Frank? I've got a couple of questions, or at least things I would like you to clarify. One is the creation of new lots within these various districts. What can and can't be done? You can't take a 12,000 square foot lot and convert it to 4,000 square foot lots, because that would be out of compliance with the underlying zoning, correct?
So I thought I was sharing screen for a second. That is definitely the intention. And I think to make that abundantly clear, Suzanne and I had a discussion and have a proposed amendment to a new footnote to the table that will make that perfectly clear, that says that these dimensional requirements apply to these uses, to lots at the time of existence, at the time of the adoption of this ordinance. So making it very clear, because I certainly want to emphasize the number of times that Vice Chair Jane Remsen stressed that this is not creating the ability to create 4,000 square foot lots in the district. It's those lots that currently comply with those dimensional standards at the moment of time when we adopt this. And in fairness, that's what the state is saying as well. You can't divide, you can't re-divide. So we're kind of locking the current development pattern of those 4,000 square foot lots in place for this ordinance. So we have language for that.
The second thing I'd like to talk about, I brought this up before, and I listened to the planning board discussions on this, is the issue of whether or not we can require peaked roofs in the 35-foot areas as a means of sort of preventing kind of the, I don't mean this too derogatorily, the Chelseafication of triple deckers with flat, I know, I'm sorry, don't let anybody know, of a lot of flat roofs. In keeping with the character of the existing neighborhoods, which by and large are peaked roofs, can we put that into the addition for the height? So we're allowing an additional 5 feet. Part of that would be complying with a peak roof or some sort of peak roof requirement that lessened the overall blocking impact of that.
So we do have some language for that. I also will the only tiny bit of caution, and I think Emily has come up with something that provides some variation, is if somebody was going to convert a 2 to a 3 and the roof doesn't meet the peak requirements, dimensional requirements, that
Everything
would
else
also be
does.
a violation of the ordinance. So, but we do have language for that. And maybe after we get through those, we can show you what we've done to address so far.
It may be that 8 other people here don't care about that, and that's fine. I'm just.
Yep. No, okay. We can provide an option for that.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
Anything else on dimensional table? Oh, we're still going to be done. Front yard may be modified. We got the front yard. Off-street parking and loading requirements, 530.6.1. Do we have any discussion, any questions on minimum parking requirements within the MFOD? Mr. Benson.
Thank you. So just so the layperson out there can understand what 1.5 spaces per dwelling unit means when we're looking at Schoolhouse Road.
Yeah, so you would do the calculation of the number of units. Again, I think there's a little bit of a difference with that district. It's in some ways, it's certainly separated by the road network from the downtown area. It is a little bit more kind of mid-rise suburban in nature. So there is kind of that ability to have some guest parking associated with it. And maybe, some of those units have folks with 2 cars versus 1 car. So I think, that's what was developed when the FMOD was created, the mixed use overlay district for Halyard, and that was kind of carried for that same character of the same district.
Councilor Worthley?
A question on the last piece, if I could
You
go
got to keep up,
backwards.
man. You got to keep up.
Trying to. If I have a house that's a single family, 2-family in the downtown district, and its current construction is on the property line, and then I want to convert to a 3-family, what relief would I need? Can I do that by right, or do I need to get zoning board? And
Special permit.
so
Side yard setback, non-conforming structure on maybe a non-conforming lot, change of use, 3-family special permit from the zoning board. And if you're too tall, come to the city council for height.
It would require advertising and a butter notification, all those
Yeah.
things. Okay, thank you. That covers a lot of the property.
It does cover a lot. And again, that sort of goes to the issue of the 2,270 units being this theoretical thing based on a nuclear disaster having wiped out all the houses. Anything else on parking?
Find another analogy, please.
That's what it is, man. I'm watching Fallout. All right, so where are we at now? We're at 530.7, signs. Any question on signs? 530.8, inclusionary housing requirements. Any questions on this? We've already gone over this, but is there any questions specifically on this front? Tony?
I just wanted to revisit because I don't know if I was asking the question the wrong way. If we create this multifamily overlay district and it's at 10% instead of the inclusionary zoning, someone goes in after we've adopted it, before the HLC tells us that we can go to 15, would they be eligible to just do 10%? If they would, well, they'd be doing more. They would.
Okay, now I understand your question. That's a
But
little
actually-
bit,
actually,
bit clearer.
Because it's 3-family.
Yeah.
Does it even?
Oh, yeah, you're right. It doesn't even apply.
The only time it applies
Doesn't
to
apply to
this
the,
is.
it doesn't
Right.
apply at all to three families.
Yeah.
So we're kind of protected in that respect. If the housing authority moves at lightning speed,
Right. Yeah.
they are in the business of affordable housing. I don't think we have to worry there too much. But yeah, it's a good question.
Thank you.
Okay, we have figured out signs, really? No controversy on signs? Okay. Inclusionary housing, we're gonna, I think the sentiment here would be to leave the language as it is until we're sure that EFA is accepted by the state EOHLC. Site plan review, we've gone over site plan review. I do have a suggested amendment from the AG's office to add to this, but are there any questions on site plan review? Super. We will be looking at some minor modification in the paragraph that, yes, go ahead.
You said amendment. Are you going to present that amendment now or
No,
later in the?
when we do the.
Okay.
When we do the
I assume
motion,
that. I just
yeah.
wanted it.
Development design standards, McKenna, all this stuff is site plan review. That leads us to the additional changes, which is adding multi-family overlay district MFOD to section 511 3.1 after village business, adding the following text to 5.8.2 applicability to read as follows: E, which is in the motion, projects of 6 or more dwelling units in the Maplewood Avenue area and Schoolhouse Road area subdistricts of the multifamily overlay district and FOD, and delete section 530, the permitting of certain pre-existing multifamily uses, which is sunsetted in 2020. That is the nut of it, folks. That's it. While you're sitting there and pondering all this, do we have any specific questions now that we'd like to bring? Val?
I just have a kind of a technical question. So all these round circles frequently include a street that might be divided. Half the street might be in the circle, half it might be outside. So is there a plan when we approve this to have a specific location in that street? For example, if it's Centennial Ave or something and half of it is not in it and half is, I was wondering if it would be prudent for us to come up with a street number where it ends, because that circle is going to be tough for people to understand if their house is included in that radius or not. And I just think that could help with a lot of questions if we could have a technical understanding of where those streets cut off.
I think are you saying moving forward if this is enacted?
Yes.
Okay, we can certainly add these overlay districts to our online GIS. Somebody will know exactly if they will click on their property, they can turn on the layer and they're either in or out. That's probably the best way to do it.
Aggie too. It's not going to be a smooth.
Yeah, it's not a circle. It does follow properties and right of ways, but
Yeah.
yep.
The only reason why it might be appropriate to do it before the public hearings is because some people might want to know if their property is included or not. And so there could be a little bit of a gray there that might influence how they're going to either vote in favor or be promoting this or not. That's the only, I like your solution, but
Yeah.
that was my thought on that. Other than that, I have no further questions.
The upside is that if it's in the zone and they don't want it to be in the zone, they are perfectly, they have the right never to do anything
That's true.
different with the property. The only people who might be annoyed are the ones who are on the edge of the line, who wish that they were in the line. But there's not much we can do about that. The lines are drawn at some point.
Butter to the line, whether they be able to be grandfathered and included or not, or whether it's a hard line or
I think it's a hard
butter's
line. It's a hard line.
Okay.
Hard line. You
And it
gotta walk the
doesn't mean,
line.
it doesn't mean they can't apply for a 3-family not by right,
That's correct.
right? They just
Yeah.
have to go through a different
All of those
process.
rights exist under the current ordinances. So are there any other questions at all
Any
at this point?
questions?
Knock yourself out, Frank. Go for
Okay,
it.
perfect. I just have 4 questions, sort of.
Anybody
piggybacking on what
else?
Marjorie Gray said, what you hear on social media, just quick 4 questions. Is there any current laws of how many people you could have in your house?
There are health and sanitary codes that regulate that.
And three,
There's nothing in, and just think about it now, there's nothing in our zoning ordinance right now for everything else that we permit that has limitations such as that.
okay.
So it's kind of a restating of kind of fair housing law and putting that jurisdiction where it belongs, which is with the health department.
Perfect. Okay, and some of these are not my questions, these just people. Anyway, can the state force you to build on your own house? Saying that, oh, your law applies, you have 2-family, we want you to build a 3-family as you
No.
hear that? Okay, perfect.
It will one day.
Again, Jason, thank you. Thank you, Counselor Grow. Sorry, I got informal there for a second.
I'm,
These, I just wanted to make sure they're on record, these questions. As,
absolutely, no. keep
And
going.
what is going on with the states that are suing? So what is going on with the cities suing the state that don't want to do the 3A?
There's a whole variety of different things that are being brought, and it's in the courts right now, and I'm not an attorney, and I don't think Suzanne would speak to it either. Communities take suits, and, the courts will determine, the various things that have been challenged with the law as well as the guidelines.
I will ask, if I can, on that, Suzanne, can you explain, though, if the Supreme Judicial Court comes back and says, 3A is not constitutional according to Massachusetts law, we're going to strike it down. What's the net impact on our zoning ordinance and moving forward?
Softball.
So the net impact, if
Well, if the
so, if
Supreme,
if the Supreme Judicial Court determines that 3A is unconstitutional, and the City Council adopts a zoning ordinance, that there is no effect on the zoning ordinance. You're adopting the zoning ordinance under your authority to adopt zoning. Whether or not it applies to 3A, whether or not they find 3A is unconstitutional or not, doesn't affect the fact that what you're doing is you're adopting zoning that says you can do a 3-family as of right here, and here are your dimensional requirements.
but I guess the question I'm asking is if we decided we're doing this in large part because we're required to do it. If we decided after such a ruling that we didn't, this SJC said 3A is not a law, the City Council has the authority to amend our zoning back to whatever we want to do, or we can leave it the way it is, but there's no consequence to that.
I hesitate to answer that question because it would depend on what the SJC determined and what the impact would be. I can speculate and say in certain situations, yes, we could do that. In other situations, we wouldn't be able to. But I don't think that's necessarily helpful to look at what happens if the SJC rules this unconstitutional and what's the impact on our obligation as a city under the current law. We know some municipalities have not adopted 3A, are out of compliance, and the Attorney General's office has taken action with regard to those communities, and some communities have taken action with regard to it. So I don't think it's helpful for us in our our review of what's before us to speculate on what happens if the SJC comes out with some sort of decision.
Fair. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Jeff, you got one? Nope. Dylan?
Hi, maybe Solicitor Egan, you can answer this. So looking at just the bare bone law under section 43A, looking at B, the MBTA communities that fail to comply with this section shall not be eligible to the Housing Choice Initiative. And then also going to, they talk about the local capital projects fund and also the Mass Works infrastructure. The city would not be eligible for those grants, correct?
Correct. Yes.
don't
Yep.
apply.
So we take advantage of a lot of those grants from the state and federal government. And so if we did not comply, we would be out of compliance. We'd be in violation of the law, and we would not be eligible for state grants.
So just so I understand, you were alluding to, does the city of Gloucester get local capital projects funds? We're looking at that one. And then looking at the Housing Works infrastructure program, does the city get stuff like?
Yes, we do. We do. And I don't know if Greg would be more appropriate
You were
to
alluding
speak to that.
to-
Yes.
Thank you.
I could elaborate on that a little bit. The capital improvements fund, that funds over 10% of the Gloucester Housing Authority. So it's really important for their ability to improve and upgrade their properties, especially since public housing's pretty old. MassWorks, there's been $6 million that the city's received from MassWorks. The Housing Works program is brand new. It just started last year. So we haven't received anything from that, but we certainly could in the future if we remain eligible.
I jump in there. Also, my understanding is in talking, when we did the sewer treatment plant review, we talked about the fact that we would be eligible for a 0.5% discount on the borrowing rate from the state revolving fund, which is potentially millions of dollars in saved interest. Yeah, Tony?
Yeah, that's because we're a housing choice community.
Right. If we lost that,
But
we'd-
also Milton, the state immediately took back their Seaport Economic Council money, and that we've reaped millions of dollars in Gloucester, and we're highly dependent upon that.
any other questions?
Oh,
And go
I
ahead. Rick.
was,
Sorry, go
so
ahead.
since Alex was alluding to the MassWorks infrastructure program, that can go to roads, sidewalk improvement, seawall, that type of stuff, correct?
There's a separate program for seawalls. There's a
seawall,
dam
yeah.
and seawall program, but it is for infrastructure.
Okay.
Yep. Roads, sewers,
So,
water,
yeah.
infrastructure. Yep.
And we've gotten grant money from that.
Yep.
That's fixed roads across the city, correct?
I mean, they're
Yep.
defined scope, but
Yep.
we've had 2 projects that we've gotten MassWorks grants from.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. If there's no more questions, I think what we're going to try to do, and if the will of the committee, is to go ahead and make a motion tonight.
Oh, I wanted to walk through those changes that we discussed.
Yes.
Because we haven't actually showed you what that looks like.
That's perfect timing for that.
Yes. So let me share my screen again. Sorry about that. Sorry to interrupt.
We're going to find
Make sure that everybody's looking at the same thing.
We're talking about the additional changes at the end of this, the original memo that we.
No. This, I have it in slides because one thing that we discussed was peak roof,
Right?
if you choose. And Emily, if she's still on, not sure if she is.
I would have run for the hills.
No, not sure if we lost her.
I'm here. I'm here.
Oh, there you are. So if you want to speak to this, just kind of the architectural aspect of the roof line and the draft language.
Yes, happy to. Greg had asked me to look into some ways of defining roof lines. So I found this very handy graphic that shows different roof pitches and the proportion relative to the building. I had seen in some other sources a while back the idea of, allowing for a range that would be appropriate for the area. So it looks, based on not wanting too flat a roof. I heard that was the concern, but also not wanting it to be overly peaked. I've suggested a roof pitch between 4/12 and 9/12. And to make it appropriate to the massing of the proposed building. So that could go into the development standards that you looked at earlier.
That would be development standards for where?
So I guess the question is whether or not development standard or because this may be a greater concern in the West Gloucester and downtown station area, maybe less of a concern for the other districts. We could do a footnote on the height requirement for those districts.
Yes,
So-
absolutely. Yeah.
So this is kind of what the table would look like if we made some adjustments to the footnotes. Suzanne had mentioned, or I had mentioned that Suzanne provided language to kind of belt and suspender the minimum lot area requirements. So there's a new A that comes under lot area. The Maplewood Avenue footnote was, that was relating to, if we move forward, step back. So the lot area requirement language, that footnote on lot area would read that lot area requirements for as of right residential structures in the MFOD, and that's in front of my screen, so I can't see it, shall only apply to lots in existence as of the effective date of the adoption of the MFOD. So that would cover being very clear that you can't create a 4,000 square foot lot. The underlying district of 5,000 would be required in that district, as well as you can't create new 6,000 square foot lots in the West Gloucester Station area. B is the same language that was already there that you had been looking at earlier. It just becomes B because now there's an A because it appears in the table. And then the front yard was already there. And then building height, taking the language and now having a new footnote D after the height requirement for downtown and West Gloucester Station area would read, the roof of a residential structure permitted in the downtown station area and West Gloucester Station area subdistrict shall have a pitch between 4/12 or 9/12 as appropriate to the massing of the proposed building. So kind of taking that same language and applying it there.
Okay, Tony?
Yeah, the 912 is, the example you showed of the 3-family, that had at least a 12 pitch. That was a 12/12. So I think, that we really should not have anything in here, at a, top end. And also, you can accomplish an awful lot with a hip roof. I don't know if anybody, the one on Pleasant Street had a hip roof, the example. So, but
Let me ask, let me ask, Jane, you guys talked about this in the planning board meeting. Is there a reason you guys didn't include it, or was it something that you were just done?
Probably the latter. We thought you guys might have more opinions on it than we did.
All right. Well, I personally am grateful for the language that you've come forward with. But anyway, any other changes? Oh, you want to? Yeah, you want to?
Just so the benefit of this, because again, I'm no expert on roofs. I've never been up on a roof. But just what's the benefit? Just
It's
bare-
purely
What's
aesthetic.
the benefit?
Purely aesthetic. I mean, if you don't want flat roof structures, then you put in a requirement for the peak. If you want to, again, that height also maybe affords somebody, if there's a new structure proposed to have a taller ceiling height on the first floor and then lesser height on the second and third floor, it's really a design consideration. We don't require it. To your point, I'm over here, I'm outside the district. I don't have any of these standards being applied, but I'm kept at 30 feet. I'm inside the district, I can go to 35, but now I have a design requirement. So it's either, and again, if you want to provide a broader range, you could do that as well. It's just a matter of whether you're going to infuse some architectural detail into as of right permitting or leave it as 35 feet. Somebody gets to design a building, and as long as they meet the setbacks and dimensional requirements, they can get a permit.
Is there a minimum pitch requirement that you could have and not an outside?
flat roof is 0.
Right, but could you say 412 is the?
412 would be, it would be, well, where's 412 on there?
You just clarify so that if, in fact, I wanted a flat roof, do I just not qualify in this district
it's
at this
wrong
time?
with
Or
you.
whether, would there then be an
This-
opportunity to seek a variance to allow me to do so?
So once you don't comply, you have to go, you can't apply under this ordinance. So you'd have to go to the zoning board and apply for
It
height.
may be that I'm trying to micromanage this a little too much. I mean, considering the volume of potential development, maybe this is not an issue. And it's something we could certainly revisit if suddenly, 50 flat roof buildings popped up in neighborhoods. So I don't think it's going to happen. So I'm okay with or without
The
it.
good news is it's D, so I don't have to
D.
upset the lettering that I've already established.
All right. And we could change our mind between now and next week. So
Well, you just tell me if you want that included in a draft dated September 4th, because otherwise I've put these things into the ordinance to provide for, the language for next week. So if that falls off, just let me know. The other minor tweak is in 530.9 site plan review. The language read, 6 or more dwelling units shall be required to submit an application for site plan review and are subject to the requirements of section 5.8. And the recommended change was to strike B and make it require site plan review. I think I knew what it meant. I think Emily knew what it meant. But it does require that you go through the site plan review with this language, whereas all you had to do is submit an application. we would review it, but hey. So minor change, but that was the only comment from the AG review. So really, I think that is it for changes. So you can discuss whether you want to include D or not.
Okay.
And otherwise, I think we've encapsulated it. Now we just remove the footnote
Do
D.
you want to go back to that? We haven't made the amendment yet, but we will have to amend that. Okay. So I guess I'm going to ask Tony, we're at the stage now where if we go to a motion, then it's the Planning and Development Committee that does the deliberations at this stage. Do you all want to take off or you want to hang out? It's up to you. I think we probably shouldn't deliberate as a full council on the motion.
Oh, we will, no, you
Yeah.
guys will, so I can, we would all have to get up though, if I adjourn the meeting of the whole.
You guys can hang out.
I think there's some extra chairs.
Yeah, there's a few people on the right here can make room. That'd be great. I'm sort of leaving it to
This
you.
is your, I
Because
think.
we're going to probably have to read the actual
The whole thing.
ordinance, yeah. So I'm just sort of giving you guys the option to.
You don't have to read the whole ordinance.
We don't have to read the ordinance?
No.
All right, then let's just plow forward. All right.
But should
In
we
that
adjourn
case-
as a committee of the whole?
Then we'd all have to get up. We don't, have to-
Right.
we always adjourn them after.
Yeah, we're just going to, we're
Yeah.
going to read
Oh,
we're going to
we're
read
not
the
voting.
motion.
No, we are not voting.
Yeah, you're not voting, and you're not
Oh,
deliberating.
Suzanne, did you have something on that?
No.
Sure, okay. So with that in mind, I will ask Vice Chair to read the committee recommendation, adding
Yep.
this language in here.
Thank you. P&D recommends that the City Council adopt the proposed multifamily overlay district ordinance and associated amendments to the Gloucester zoning ordinance to create zoning districts and associated amendments to allow as of right multifamily housing to comply with the MBTA Communities Guidelines and MGL Chapter 40A, Section 3A by deleting the existing Section 5.30, asserting a new Section 5.30 multifamily overlay district, MFOD, with amendments as discussed and incorporated in the draft dated September 4th, 2024, and associated zoning map dated 8/8/2024, August 8th, 2024, adding multifamily overlay district MFOD after VB in section 5.11.3, section 1, and by adding E, projects of 6 or more dwelling units in the Maplewood Avenue area and Schoolhouse Road area sub-districts of the multifamily overlay district MFOD in section 5.8.2 applicability of the site plan review ordinance, and I so move.
Right. Been moved and seconded. Been moved by Val Gilman, seconded by Dylan Benson. Any discussion here at this point? Val?
So to this point, we've followed this ordinance really closely. And I think we had a very rigorous conversation tonight about it. And with the few amendments that we might want to discuss, I'm very comfortable with this to date. And I think the planning board and city administration, our community development planning board and the planning director have done a magnificent job with this, and I'm very favorable on this. So I look forward to any amendments and discussion, but thank you.
All right, just for clarification, the amendments were suggested by the planning director. Do we want to go through those amendments again very quickly? Because those are incorporated into the motion you just read. So I want to make sure that you're clear that the associated amendments is discussed and incorporated in the draft dated September 4th, 2024. So we should talk about potential amendments and make sure that assuming that we're on board with every amendment, that would be incorporated into the motion moving forward. We wouldn't have to vote on them individually.
Okay, so there's really only three amendments. One is the addition of a footnote to the lot area dimensional requirement in the table, section 530.4.1, which would essentially only allow these dimensional standards to be, or these uses to be allowed using these dimensional standards for lots that are in existence at the time of adoption of the ordinance. Then there is the question on whether or not you want to include a footnote on building height associated with the downtown station and West Gloucester Station sub-districts that would require a certain pitch of the roof. And then the third is the amendment to the section related to site plan review that merely changes it from requiring site plan review from requiring the submission of an application for site plan review in section 530.9.
Any clarifications on the amendments?
It would be helpful for me to again visualize it. I know that you showed it before, but I would
Sure.
find that to be
I can
helpful.
do that.
I think the public needs to see that as well, watching on cable, Zoom, whatever, do these days.
Okay. So footnotes aside of how they would appear in the table, again, so the table itself, the footnote lettering would be amended. The language, a new footnote A that deals with the lot area requirement, such that only lots in existence can apply under these standards, under the underlying district would otherwise control the development or division of new lots. And then the addition of the standard relating to building height for those two sub-districts, relating to the requirement of a pitch to the roof line. And then the change to 530.9 site plan review, just a little wordsmithing for the requirement of site plan review rather than an application.
So can you take it back to the site, to the building height? I'm going to offer an amendment to that, which is to say shall have a pitch of at least 4/12 or 4/12 as appropriate to the massing of the proposed building, and leave that in for now. So I'm going to do that for now. So I'm going to amend that. Remove 9/12, add a pitch of a minimum of 4/12 as appropriate to the massing of the proposed building. So move.
This is just P and D.
This is just between us. So one of you.
I'll second it.
Okay, there we go. Thank you. don't parliamentary right now. The reason I'm doing that is to leave it in for the moment, because it's relatively new concept, really new thought. People can have a think about it. I'm perfectly happy to consider removing it at the making of the main motion and the main vote. I would like it to be in people's thought in terms of a design structure, and I think just from my perspective, it would alleviate some of the issues that people might have about 35 feet. So I'm going to suggest we have at least a minimum pitch. We don't necessarily have to have a maximum pitch, as Tony pointed out. That would be a useful thing, at least for until we get to the main city council meeting. So.
And you
You
think
just-
that this, my question for why you think that this would help alleviate some of the concerns about height? Okay.
This is specifically the only amendment because everything else was already in the wording of what I read.
I'm amending the footnote, which is an amendment to what has already been incorporated, yes.
Okay, so on this amendment,
Mhm.
can you be more clear with what you just said? Can you repeat it one time?
It would
again?
meant to read, the roof of a residential structure. Just made it go away. I couldn't see it though. I was reading it off the, let me see. The roof of a residential structure permitted in the downtown station area and West Gloucester Station subdistricts shall have a pitch of at least 4/12. I don't know what that measurement means. As appropriate to the massing of the proposed building.
Okay. And you moved it and I seconded it. So that is the amendment right now that we're to
We're voting on the
discuss.
amendment, right.
Vote on the amendment.
So any other discussion on the amendment? Okay, all in
Wait,
favor?
wait, I have a quick
Yep.
discussion. I think it's healthy to put this out there now, so I agree with you on that. And I would look forward to people discussing this at the public hearing. So I will support this for tonight.
All right.
I think in
Can any members of the committee of the whole ask questions
No.
for you?
No.
Sorry.
no.
No.
We say it nicer, more nicely?
You can ask questions next week.
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
So opposed, 0. So the amendment to the footnote reads as stated. So that leads us basically to the final discussion of the overall motion. Is there any other discussion on the motion itself? Main motion. You've already said you.
I've already spoken.
Do you have anything you'd
No,
like to add?
I have nothing further, I think.
All right. Well, I will say again, thanking Greg Cadamatore and the Community Development Department, Alex Kopelman, everybody on the planning board for the hours and hours that they have put forward. I'm really appreciative of Suzanne's attention to the legal issues. I'm very, very appreciative of, this is the time I get to make my speech, of the public and the public input and the pros and cons and the ideas and everything that came in from the public commentary, including the dreaded social media. But it all came down to creating, I think, what is by any measure something that not everybody's going to love. And I think that's probably is not just the definition of a democracy, is that, you know, there are folks who thought this should have gone a lot farther. There are folks who thought this should not be as it is. I think that the issue that people seem to get hung up on is whether or not this is going to address our housing affordability or affordable housing crisis. And the answer is not a lot, but maybe some. And it will be part of hopefully a concerted effort moving forward, one piece of a multi-piece puzzle that will help to get us to a place where we're encouraging the creation of housing that's more affordable to middle class and working class families. I really appreciate the attention to the detail and in making this, and I look forward to the public hearing on September 11th, and hope that folks come out and understand that we are attempting to, one, bring ourselves into compliance with the state law, but two, this is more about that. We could have done paper compliance, or we could have tried to do paper compliance, and this is still going to give us some aspect of facilitating multifamily creation, and that is a good thing. So with that, any other comments? Yep.
Just, I will say I've been hearing a lot from different folks in the community so far, and I look forward to hearing from more members of the community, specifically Ward 2, at the public hearing, and then there'll be another additional public hearing continuation of that, if that's correct.
26th,
Yeah.
correct.
And I look forward to that. And I understand folks have come to me that they don't like this law, and there are many folks in Ward 2 that have concerns about this, and I understand those concerns. But I also have heard from other folks about the need to comply, and also the failure to comply has great consequences. This is a very tough decision for me, because I've been hearing from a lot of constituents that really are not wanting us to comply. Today, I'm going to vote present, and then going forward, I look forward to hearing from the further public input, and from that, we'll make a decision. But for today, I'm going to be voting present so it can move along, and then there'll be a final vote after the public hearings.
Anything else? Val?
No.
Nope. All right. Without any further ado, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Present.
Opposed? 0. Motion passes 2 in favor, 1 present, no opposition. So the next thing we're going to see is we're going to see this at the public hearing on September 11th, 6:30, correct? Normal time. Planning board. It's a joint planning board and city council public hearing. The procedure is at this point, moving forward, is that we will open that public hearing, both by the planning board and the city council. They are combined in the sense that we will not have a separate public hearing for each one. The planning board will then decide at the culmination of that particular meeting whether or not they would like to take a vote on the formal recommendation of the ordinance for approval by the city council. We will continue the public hearing because we've already stated that we're going to continue that public hearing until the 26th. But the planning board can make their decision on that night or they can carry on if they want to. And then a decision will be made on the 26th, one way or the other. So with that, you want to say something?
Well, you can adjourn your meeting if you wish.
Yeah, I was going to do that. Yes. Yeah, sure.
I definitely urge everyone in the community to let their voice be heard at the public hearing, and also they can reach out directly to all of us and be heard as well. And I have an open line of communication. I urge my constituents to voice their cons for it or their pros for it, whatever you have. But just please share that with me. Thank you.
Right. And Tony, about written communication, when is the deadline for that for this? Do we have?
72 hours in advance of the public hearing is
So
the
it's-
city council's. So
So the
it'll be
11th
72
yeah.
is a Wednesday, so the Friday before.
So if you were to submit written testimony to the city council
Tomorrow.
planning board, it would be by Friday.
Right, so day after tomorrow.
Friday, by noon on Friday, correct?
If-
'Cause,
Yep,
what's
yeah,
that?
12:30. And also there's 2 sessions scheduled for the public hearing, so I believe that there's a great possibility that the public comment period will not be closed at the first one.
That's correct. Yeah.
So,
Okay, so-
because we want to be able to give people ample opportunity to be able to weigh in on this.
And also, I would strongly urge people who still have questions to make them known to your city councilor. So hopefully they can be explained. But there has been a tremendous amount of misinformation. I hope at this point the council has managed to weave its way through that and dispense with the garbage information in favor of the information that's mostly affecting the city at this
Are
point.
you going to
So-
adjourn so we can speak?
Yeah, sure. Why not? Well, maybe not. A motion to adjourn.
Wait.
Val has one more.
Before we adjourn.
Yeah?
Before we adjourn.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Thank you. We're gonna do something here, so you're gonna have to hold on for 1 second.
From the Planning and Development Subcommittee.
This is from the Planning and Development Subcommittee. I would have included you all, but I didn't. This is our last meeting with Sherry White, and she has been an amazing clerk of committees. She's been an amazing babysitter. She's managed to keep us in line, to keep us on course, to clarify things when they need to be clarified. She's just done an amazing job, and we are going to miss you terribly. We may have to set up a Zoom thing at your restaurant. But with that, we would like to say properly, thank you for all you've done for us, and to thank you with a little bit of flowers. Just from your favorite subcommittee. All right, motion to adjourn would be in order.
So moved.
Okay. Second.
Thank you, Sherry, for all your service to
All
our
in favor?
city.
Okay,
Yeah.
you can talk. Sorry.
Aye.
We're going to move to adjourn the Planning and Development Subcommittee, remain the meeting of the whole. So all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, I just want to explain what the pitches mean on the
Okay.
roofs.
Yeah,
So a 12 pitch is a 45 degree.
right, 1 foot by 1 foot.
Yeah, 1 foot by 1 foot. So, you go from there. 6 foot is, 22 and a half degrees. So 612 is 22 and a half. So 412 is even lower. And flat is 0.
Flat's flat.
So that was it. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn the committee of the whole.
Second.
So moved.
Second.
Motion made by Counselor Worthley, seconded by Counselor Majota. All those in favor?
Aye. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Good job.
Head of the game, Frank.